Chapter 1044. Placing herself in the tide's backland, St. George Borough, in a factory room filled with junk. Light flashed in a mirror filled with obvious cracks. Its surface turned dark and deep, as though it was connected to another world. Suddenly, a white hand reached out from under the mirror, as though it had penetrated through layers of aqueous waves. A figure walked out from the shadows. She was none other than the sweet and beautiful demoness Trissy in a long black dress. There was a rare paleness to her face, as though her face had lost all its ruddiness. Her forehead was covered in dense beads of sweat. With a smacking sound, the suitcase in Trissy's hand fell to the ground. She could hardly suppress the horror in her eyes. She then muttered to herself blankly, "His messenger is actually an angel." At that moment, Trissy felt a chill run down her spine, as though a cold wind had blown at her. She had never expected how dangerous it would be to summon a messenger previously. Thankfully, the woman holding the four heads in her hands watched her silently for a while before she left without doing anything. 160 Buckland Street. Inside Dwayne Dantes' mansion. "Who's it from?" Klein asked with anticipation as he received the letter from Miss Messenger. The four heads in Rionette Tinker's hands spoke one after another. "Vessel of dirtiness, darkness, this nickname." Klein was taken aback when he heard that. For a moment, he didn't immediately figure out who Miss Messenger was referring to. In his mind, the people who knew how to summon his messenger quickly flashed past, one by one, as he filtered through them. In a few seconds, he had the corresponding guess. Trissy. From what Klein knew, this demoness, who had been renamed to Trissy Cheek, might very well be one of the mediums for the primordial demoness awakening or descent upon the world. In such a situation, calling her a vessel wasn't wrong. And people who knew enough about the mysterious world knew that the primordial demoness was an evil goddess, one that was known as the ultimate bringer of the apocalypse that would end everything. She had the creation of the apocalypse and the destruction of everything as her mission. She also wielded authorities such as desires related to feelings and emotions. It wasn't very apt to describe her with dirtiness and darkness, but it was understandable. Similarly, dirtiness and darkness could also describe Trissy, who had been corrupted by the evil goddess to a certain extent. As expected of an angel. She actually dared to say that about the primordial demoness. Klein secretly marveled as he opened the letter and quickly read it. At that moment, he suddenly recalled something. He hurriedly looked at Miss Messenger and said, "What reaction did the sender have when she saw you?" "She was very scared." Rionette Tinker's three heads spoke one after another without giving the last one a chance to speak, as its head was simply left agape. Klein's expression turned slightly heavy as he deliberated and asked, "Did you mark her?" The head of Rionette Tinker, which failed to speak previously, rushed to speak. "No," the remaining three blonde red-eyed heads added, "because she had the aura of primordial." Klein fell silent for a few seconds before nodding. "I understand." After watching Miss Messenger step into the void and leave, he unfurled the piece of paper and quickly read Trissy's letter. "She actually sought me out to deal with Saintess of White Katerina. Isn't this exactly what I wanted to do?" Klein's eyes shimmered a few times as he immediately rummaged for a black sticky blob. Right on the heels of that, he transformed into Gammon Sparrow and smeared the blob uniformly onto a tiny mirror in the room. After patiently waiting for nearly 10 minutes, the black sticky blob vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind. Klein had failed to contact demoness Trissy. As expected, Trissy, who has been corrupted by the primordial demoness to a certain extent, managed to identify Miss Messenger's level and was given a fright. She probably wouldn't communicate with Gammon Sparrow anytime soon. Sigh, if I had known Miss Messenger is a special angel, I definitely wouldn't have let her appear in front of Trissy, or I would have informed her that if a demoness were to summon her, she can bring both the person and letter over. Klein sighed silently and could only blame it on his luck. At that moment, he suddenly heard a series of illusory pleas. In a dark alley in the Backland Bridge area, Zio hid Wintry Blade and entered the area, looking around warily. "Not bad. You're getting more and more experienced." A deep male voice sounded, and a figure walked out from the darkness around the corner. He stood tall, wearing a golden mask that revealed his eyes, nostrils, mouth, and cheeks. It was none other than the MI9 member who had contacted Zio before. "Why did you contact me so urgently?" Zio asked. The golden-masked man didn't make any small talk and directly asked, "You still seem to be monitoring Viscount Stratford's surroundings. Have you discovered anything unusual recently? Xiao thought and said, yes. He had intimate contact with a girl of unknown origins. He made her visit him at his residence late at night several times. I tried to track that woman down, but I failed both times. Also, Viscount Stratford suddenly went out in the middle of the night 2 days ago. I don't know where he went because I didn't manage to follow him. The golden-masked man tersely acknowledged this as he went deeper into the details. Xiao answered according to the details she had seen back then. She only concealed the fact that she had met Charmaine in the carriage, and how she had followed Viscount Stratford all the way outside the warehouse. Not bad. Your persistence was rewarding. The golden-masked man nodded slightly. He didn't seem to doubt what Xiao had said. He sighed and said, with this, your contributions to us will increase significantly. To be frank, if this continues, you'll soon be able to accumulate the contributions needed for the Sequence 6 potion. However, before that, there will definitely be a strict examination. And with your background, it will fail the examination without a doubt. After all, I know it very well. Actually, there's no need for you to seek the truth. I know that this was the motivation for you to persist in continuing the mission regarding Viscount Stratford, but my personal suggestion is to put the matter aside. With your current sequence and abilities, it's enough to let your mother and brother lead a very good life. Don't worry. No one will cause you trouble. And if you wish to continue persisting, I cannot guarantee what will happen. Although Xiao had already expected such an explanation, she was helpless in resisting her emotions and throbbing heart. She blurted out a question. Who exactly are you? I'm just an ordinary mid-sequence beyonder, the golden-masked man said with a smile. You might not know that the post of Captain of the Royal Guards has the corresponding authority in MI9. It's equivalent to a deputy director that handles matters related to the royal family. Back when your father was alive, I was his subordinate and had received his help in various aspects. After his passing, I, who didn't commit any wrongs or hide any matters, was removed from the core of MI9. See, I'm only responsible for informants on the outside like you. Upon saying that, the golden-masked man sighed. Your father helped me a lot. So, after I recognized you, I deliberately made you become an informant under me. With the extent of my power, I provided you some help. I have a family of my own and my own life, so I can't take excessive risks or do anything too dangerous for you. Let's do this. I'll help you get the potion formula for Judge. Afterward, stop your contributions and your pursuit to advance your sequence. Do something that will improve your life. As for what you want to do or plan to do in private, I don't know, nor do I want to know. Xiao fell into a daze. Her lips trembled as she said, What kind of person was my father? The golden-masked man sighed as he replied, He was a really brave, noble, and just aristocrat, but he wasn't that perfect. He was impulsive, eager, prone to anger. Xiao silently listened and had planned on asking further, but all she said was a phrase, Thank you. Go back. After obtaining the Judge formula, I'll leave you a message to meet me, the golden-masked man said with a wave. After Xiao completely disappeared from the alley's entrance, the golden-masked man was just about to turn around when a slightly ethereal voice sounded in his ears. She's lying. She had tailed Viscount Stratford to the scene back then. It's something that can be confirmed. The golden-masked man fell silent for a moment before saying to the shadow beside him, She might have only been worried that this would arouse suspicion. How can she defeat Viscount Stratford at her sequence? Besides, wasn't it said that Viscount Stratford carried a Grade 1 sealed artifact? I believe that she likely didn't dare approach. Otherwise, she wouldn't even be able to survive. The slightly ethereal voice replied, No matter what, since there is a doubt, we need to do further investigations. Don't inquire about it in the future. Outside the alley, Xiao walked calmly along street lamps. She deliberately didn't mention that she had followed Viscount Stratford. This wasn't to hide the truth, to clear herself of suspicion, or to not invite trouble. In fact, that was contrary to her true motives. Before the Tarot Club, her plan was to say that she had followed Viscount Stratford to a particular warehouse in the dock area. Outside, she was scared off by a terrifying hurricane. This was more convincing and made it less prone to suspicion. However, after knowing that this matter piqued the World Gairman Sparrow's interest, she secretly changed her mind and decided to use her explanation to garner suspicion. She felt that if she wanted to investigate the king's secret at her level, it might take another 3 to 5 years, or even longer. Perhaps, there wouldn't be any hope forever. But with the world's help, success was a possibility. As such, she was willing to bear the risks and place herself right in the middle of the tides. And today, before meeting the golden-masked man from MI9, Xiao had prayed to Mr. Fool so that he could inform the world Gehrman Sparrow of her thoughts. Chapter 1045 Dreamwalker above the endless grey fog, in the magnificent and ancient palace. With one hand holding the unshadowed crucifix, and the other holding the sea god's scepter, he was observing the real world through the crimson star that represented judgment. In his spiritual vision, apart from the short Miss Xiao and the golden-masked MI9 officer, there was another person hidden in the dark alley. This was a man in his 30s. He didn't have any special features, and he looked like the typical Loanese man from the mid-north area. Not only did he blend into the shadows, but he also had the characteristic of automatically making people dismiss his existence. If he weren't above the grey fog and had true vision, Klein suspected that even he wouldn't be able to discover the person if he were there in person. He would only be able to outline the person with his spiritual intuition when the person took any abnormal actions. Hiding in the shadows with psychological invisibility? Half of it depends on an item, while the other half depends on his sequence. In conclusion, this isn't a demigod. That's right. In the eyes of the king's faction, Ms. Xiao is only a sequence 7 and doesn't have any notable mystical items. If the matter concerning Viscount Stratford was really related to her, there must be a mastermind behind her, or even a faction. In this situation where there are undercurrents surging about, letting a demigod who might know too much perform the investigation might throw them into a trap. And if a demigod who knows little of the situation were to do it, there might be a chance that the information to be leaked to the three churches and result in an impetus for them to be investigated. In this case, a sequence 5 or sequence 6 beyonder with trustworthy strength while also not knowing too many secrets due to his limitations in rank is an excellent choice. Klein silently said to himself, giving up the thought of teleporting over as Gehrman Sparrow to capture him. He couldn't get any useful information for now. He decided to wait patiently, waiting for the situation to change. Of course, it wasn't possible for him to continue monitoring from above the grey fog. If that happened, his physical body in the real world would be defenseless for prolonged periods of time. An accident would be disastrous. Hence, he created a batch of charms and handed it to Judgment, the magician, and the other Tarot Club members. They were to immediately activate the charms if the situation deteriorated. That way they could receive the help of the world. This would be simpler than directly reciting the honorific name of the fool to get him to forward the information. This was inspired from the Evemite coat of arms that the ascetic leader of the Church of Evernight, Ariana, had provided him. It was equivalent to a solidified ritual that pointed to him. From a mysticism angle, the principle wasn't complicated. The difficulty needed in carrying out the ritual was that the target could react upon receiving the news from a distance away. This was to mean that for a limited distance, a sequence 3 saint was fine, but for unlimited distances, it needed to be at the angel level. As a newly advanced demigod, Gehrman Sparrow was able to allow the charm to be useful because, when he made it, he used the corresponding honorific name and symbol of sea god Calvetua, and with the help of the grey fog, he could respond throughout the world. It sounded a little complicated, but simply put, he had made use of his other identity's level. As for the materials used for the charms, they were mostly tin, extremely easy to obtain and cheap. In the Backland Bridge area, Xiao had both hands in her brown jacket pockets as she strolled leisurely along the streets. Under the light of a street lamp that was quite a distance away, her expression was relatively calm, but she was unusually tense. The hands in her pocket either held the handle of the wintry blade through a hole while the other was holding onto a charm made of tin with some force. That was the summoning charm, provided by the world Gehrman Sparrow. As she walked, she made several detours without suffering from any ambush. The night remained quiet and tranquil. Initially, she was worried that the king's faction would be able to openly capture her through MI9 or other official organizations and bring her back for an investigation. In this case, summoning Mr. World would only lead him into an extremely awkward and dangerous situation. It was equivalent to being at odds with all the official factions in Backland. But later, she realized that such a development wouldn't occur. This was because her existence would be exposed to the three churches. When that happens, the ones doing the investigation definitely wouldn't be the king's faction inside MI9. The investigation must be done in secret. The person that appears might not even be someone from the military. Well, they're still watching, afraid that I'm only bait? Mr. World said not to trouble him if we can resolve it ourselves. Xiao looked around her without letting down her guard. She didn't continue loitering outside and returned to the periphery of East Borough and entered her rented condominium. Frankly speaking, she didn't want to involve Furs in this risky endeavor. However, the two of them were the ones who had been following Viscount Stratford. This meant that Furs had also been put on the investigation list. Although, as long as Furs hid in East Borough and seldom went out, it wasn't certain that MI9 could find her. Doing so would lead to the corresponding investigations to reach out further. Based on her past experience, family and friends, as well as people communicated by letters would definitely be investigated. This easily affected others. Furthermore, if the two of them hid separately and didn't stay together, the feeling of them being bait became too obvious. It made it difficult for them to hook up any targets. After getting Furs's approval, Xiao finally chose to face the subsequent development with her friend. Opening the door and entering the house, Xiao had just taken off her cap when she saw Furs put down the magazine. She stood up, curled her hair, smiled and asked, "You weren't followed, right?" This was a secret signal that the two of them had agreed upon ahead of time. On the surface, it showed their concern about being followed, but they were actually asking if they had been investigated. No. Xiao shook her head seriously. Furs didn't continue this topic. Instead, she went on, grumbling about how she couldn't buy any good tea leaves or alcoholic beverages in the vicinity. It required her to walk very far to find them. This warm and peaceful atmosphere continued till late at night. The two of them entered the bedroom and slept in a bunk bed. After the candles were extinguished, Xiao was about to say something when a holy light suddenly appeared in front of her. The light instantly condensed into a silhouette, and 12 pairs of wings formed from scarlet flames appeared on its back. The figure descended and the layers of wings closed, enveloping Xiao. Mr. Fool's angelic blessing. Xiao was instantly enlightened. This was also a matter that she had solemnly asked Mr. Fool when she made the prayer to contact the World Gehrman Sparrow, as she already knew that, apart from the Demonist sect, the psychology alchemists was also working with the King's faction. And not only were Beyonders of the spectator pathway capable of hypnosis, but they could also dreamwalk. They needed to be careful of any investigations that used these two powers. If she didn't prepare herself, she suspected that she wouldn't even detect an investigation that had been carried out, let alone be able to inform Mr. World. Everything quickly calmed down. Xiao opened her mouth and said to Furs, who was sleeping in the bunk beneath her, "Good night." "Good night." Furs didn't react in time, as though she was almost falling asleep. This made Xiao realize that she had also received the angelic blessings. Time ticked by and the two fell asleep. After an unknown period of time, the dazed Xiao suddenly snapped awake, aware that she was dreaming. Right on the heels of that, she felt something shadowy floating in the dark sky, and all kinds of thoughts from deep within her heart surged out to form a dream. These thoughts were mainly things that she had been most keenly aware of recently, including the night she barged into the warehouse and attacked Viscount Stratford. At first, Xiao was a little frightened. She wanted to wake up from her dream, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't extricate herself from that state. It was as though she was still in a dream even when she opened her eyes. She quickly calmed down and tried to control those thoughts, only to realize that it wasn't difficult. Thus, the memories of the attacks on Viscount Stratford were buried. However, after some consideration, Xiao deliberately didn't do it well, leaving some clues behind. In the dreamland, she and Furs discovered that something weird had happened inside the warehouse, but it wasn't the same account she gave to MI9 that the tornado tore through the roof. Furthermore, they didn't escape immediately. Xiao believed that this would allow the person who invaded her dreams to notice a problem but be unable to resolve it. After this, the investigators would confirm that there was a demigod or some faction behind the two of them. They would then believe that they weren't too difficult to deal with because the level of the secret wasn't too high. This way, it was likely that they would send a demigod to deal with the aftermath. And this was a development that Xiao anticipated. After all, every demigod had a high probability of knowing the king's secrets due to the positions they occupied. At this moment, Xiao's dream began to turn scattered, as though she had escaped some sort of guidance. She knew that this was a sign of the intruder leaving. For the rest of the night, nothing abnormal happened to her and Furs. The sky lit up and the morning sun's rays started to emanate through the thin fog. After breakfast, Audrey brought along her big golden retriever, Susie, her personal servant, Annie, and her bodyguard. They boarded their carriage as usual and headed for the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation at 22 Phelps Street. The chiming of bells rang out from the outside occasionally, bringing with them some sort of special energy. It made Audrey turn to look at the street and take in the sights of people coming and going. This calmed her down and made her feel more energized. She only felt that the whole world was filled with vibrancy. Just then, from the corner of her eye, Audrey saw a figure in the carriage. The figure was wearing a black three-piece suit, a dark red bow tie, and held a top hat in his hand. His hair was completely white, but it was still thick. His light blue eyes seemed to contain infinite wisdom. This was Vin Rambus, the psychology alchemist's counselor, a demigod from the spectator pathway. Suddenly, Audrey fell into a daze, as though she had lost all her vigilance and wariness. In the carriage, Susie, Annie, and the others wore vacant looks as though they had entered a state of blankness. Vin Rambis's gentle voice rang out. 2 things. Firstly, don't you know Furs and Zio? Arrange to meet them and hypnotize them. Chapter 1046a, Test. That gentle voice seemed to resonate with the thoughts deep in Audrey's heart. She only felt a little resistant to it before feeling as though it came from her heart, and that it was her truest thoughts. Vin Rambus looked at her emerald green eyes and said unhurriedly, Secondly, in the upcoming banquets and balls, don't be as opposed as before to the few princes who take the initiative to show their fondness. Also, praise them a few times in front of Earl Hall and his wife. Remember all of the above. This is the reflection of your subconscious. Then, forget that I once said these things to you. Forget that this behavior is different from your usual behavior. Don't try to seek blessings, and stay away from key spots in the Church of Evernight's Mass. With that said, Vin Rambus retracted his gaze from Audrey's eyes. He turned to cue Annie and the rest, preventing them from being surprised by their mistress's subsequent odd behavior. After dealing with all these things, he disappeared from the carriage without causing a stir. Ring. Another bike passed by the window as Audrey's slightly anxious eyes recovered their luster. She looked at the people on the street coming and going when she suddenly let out a soft exclamation. Then, embarrassed, she turned her head to say to Annie and the rest, I forgot something. I have to visit Glaint first. At this moment, the carriage hadn't left Empress Borough and wasn't too far from Viscount Glaint's residence. The servants like Annie didn't find it strange or become put in a difficult position. They quickly instructed the coachman to turn into another street. This continued until 20 minutes to 10 in the morning. Audrey finally arrived at Phelps Street. She walked into the second floor of the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation and entered her director's office. Looking at Annie and the others either organizing documents or using the spring water they brought alone to prepare black tea, Audrey brought Susie along to the lounge that was attached to her office. It was as though she wanted to check on her face to determine if she needed her lady's maid to help touch up her makeup. During this process, Audrey glanced at the keyhole and asked Susie in a relaxed manner, Was there anything abnormal with my behavior today? This was a habit that she had only gotten in the past few days. It had only started from the moment Vin Rambus disappeared. She knew that Mr. Fool's angelic blessing wasn't permanent. It could only be sustained for some time, and she wasn't able to determine when Vin Rambus would visit her. When that happens, she wouldn't have the time to pray to Mr. Fool and do the corresponding preparations. Therefore, from her understanding and cautious attitude towards psychology and mysticism, she not only checked her behavior 3 times a day for any abnormalities or for any excessive coincidences, but she also instructed Susie to take note of her condition and be her mirror. This was a precautionary measure of being hypnotized by Vin Rambus and cued without realizing it. Susie sat by the side and thought seriously before saying, Yes. Audrey's smiling expression stiffened. She quickly looked at Susie and waited for her explanation. Susie wriggled her nose and looked around before continuing. You didn't plan on paying a visit to Viscount Glaint when you left the house, but you changed your schedule halfway. You'll inform me of the general schedule ahead of time over the past few days. Also, you said that you would discuss it with me if you decide to suddenly change or add to the schedule. Upon hearing Susie's reply, Audrey's expression turned grave. She still didn't feel that there was anything unusual about this matter, but this situation was extremely abnormal. This made her almost certain. Vin Rambus had been here before, right after she left her house and before she headed for Glaint's residence. The other party had already cued and hypnotized her and removed all traces. However, he didn't exhort a dog, making it feel like everything that it saw was normal. Audrey subconsciously wanted Susie to leave so that she could pray to Mr. Fool, But she was hesitant. Would my current behavior be monitored by Vin Rambus? Will he be sitting somewhere in this room and quietly be watching me? No, if that were to happen, he would have discovered a problem when I asked Susie. Praying wouldn't make the outcome any worse. Even if he's here, Mr. Fool would also discover it. I can promise a future sacrifice and pray that he directly send divine punishment. However, why don't I wish to pray and ask for help? Audrey stood there, all kinds of feelings running through her as she instinctively wanted to escape. This made her realize the contradiction, and she realized that there was a bit of resistance in her heart. From the perspective of psychology and mysticism, she had a vague guess. She quickly put aside the idea of seeking help, allowing herself to be in her usual state of praying to the goddess without the desire of getting a response. This greatly reduced the conflict in her heart. Audrey instantly became confident. She gestured for Susie to leave first, then she looked into the mirror and began softly hypnotizing herself. You're not asking for help. You're only doing your usual prayers. You're not asking for help. You're only doing your usual prayers. After repeating it over and over again, the vortex deep in the light greenness of Audrey's eyes that could suck a person's soul slowly dissipated, and her eyes returned to normal. She then raised both her hands and placed them between her mouth and her nose. Then, she chanted in ancient Hermes, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era. I might have met Vin Rambus." As she spoke, she didn't mention any desire for any help but described her discovery. After waiting for a while, a deep red light appeared in front of Audrey, drowning her like a tidal wave. Suddenly, her thoughts became clear, and images flashed across her mind. It was Vin Rambus in his black three-piece suit, who was sitting in a horse carriage, sitting opposite her. It was the elder who had exhorted her with a gentle voice. It was the demigod from the spectator pathway whose light blue eyes that seemed to contain infinite wisdom and vortices. At the same time, those words resounded in Audrey's ears again, making her remember everything that had happened. After the crimson glow disappeared, she saw the long bronze table in front of her. Sitting at the seat of honor at the end of the table was a figure shrouded in the grayish-white fog. As emotions of fear, horror, and panic surged through her, she stood up, lifted her skirt, and curtsied to the great existence. "Thank you for your blessings, Honorable Mr. Fool." Klein nodded and smiled approvingly. "You handled it well." Upon hearing this, Audrey suddenly felt at ease, no longer as nervous as before. She sat down and calmly described what had happened to her. As the Fool, there was no way for him to directly discuss things with Miss Justice, analyze it for her, or give suggestions. All he did was smile and say, "This is a test of fate." "A test? Only through this test will I have the qualifications to become a demigod, so that I can protect the people I want to protect in Backland, which is in a state of turmoil?" Audrey interpreted Mr. Fool's hint and nodded seriously. "I understand." Without another word, Klein sighed and smiled. "Go back and welcome it." Audrey was about to express her gratitude again when the crimson light appeared before her eyes, blurring everything she saw. In the blink of an eye, she returned to the real world, but she didn't forget or ignore anything a test. Does that mean that I have to resolve the danger of Vin Rambus without exposing my secrets? Even if I cause the death of Vin Rambus, I still wouldn't be suspected by the psychology alchemists? How should I do that? Audrey looked at the abnormally beautiful blonde in the mirror. She turned her head slightly and glanced slightly to the side. There was a large lounge in that direction. It belonged to the director, who didn't have any responsibilities in the foundation. Just 10 minutes ago, Audrey had seen Mr. Dwayne Dantes inside when she was heading up the stairs. Above the gray fog, Klein's fingers tapped on the edge of the long mottled table as he analyzed what had happened between Miss Justice and Miss Judgment last night. "That's not right. Adam had given me the unshadowed crucifix through Miss Judgment and Miss Magician. How could he not know which existence is behind them? What other test needs to be done? Last night, I thought that the investigation of Miss Zio was purely an action from the King's faction where they only used the help of a mid-sequence beyonder from the psychology alchemists. And for some reason, Adam didn't share any information of the Fool with the King's faction or the Demonist sect. After all, he still hopes that I can give him some feedback. But from the looks of it, this probe has Adam involved in it. Otherwise, Vin Rambus wouldn't be involved in this matter. Even for the Twilight Hermit Order, a saint is rather precious and important. They wouldn't give one up so easily as a sacrifice. What is Adam trying to test? He is testing to see if Miss Judgment's investigation of Viscount Stratford and her subsequent actions were purely by her own choice, or if it had the will of the fool involved. If the fool gets the unshadowed crucifix and realizes that the king's secret is related to Adam's scheme while still insisting that his subordinates investigate it, that will be making the Twilight Hermit Order an enemy. And Adam knows that Gehrman Sparrow is a blessed. But with Adam's abilities, there's no need to test out anything. Just sitting next to Misjudgment and listening to her true thoughts will be enough to grasp the actual situation. There's no need to go through so much effort. Unless he has already left Backland, or rather to avoid certain problems, he doesn't dare enter this big city again, and can only investigate it through his subordinates. My warning to Ms. Ariana and the Church of Evernight has taken effect, causing Adam to sense the danger of a divine descent? Probably. Even though he knows that Gehrman Sparrow has something to do with the death console, he probably wouldn't notice that something has happened to Artificial Death. Even the Numinous Episcopate's Artificial Death faction hasn't noticed a thing. Therefore, with the authority of concealment augmenting this, he has no idea that the goddess wouldn't be able to carry out a divine descent for a long period of time. Next up, I'll have to deal with Vin Rambus. I must make sure that Miss Justice is steered clear so as to not have any relations and isn't suspected. Just as this thought crossed his mind, he saw Miss Justice Audrey enter the director's lounge through her prayer light in search of Dwayne Dantes. He quickly reined in his thoughts and returned to the real world. Chapter 1047 Brainstorm. Good morning, where's Mr. Dantes? Audrey smiled politely as she asked the young male valet that was of Lone and East Balam descent. Enuni bowed and said, "He went to the washroom and will be back soon. Honorable lady, do you wish to wait here?" All right. Audrey found a single-seater and sat dowy with all sorts of thoughts running through her mind. Frankly speaking, if she only had to deal with Vin Rambus, she had already come up with a concrete plan. It was to hypnotize herself in advance. When Vin Rambus came to gather feedback, she would activate the World Gehrman Sparrow's charm without any ill intent. Then, she would work with the crazy adventurer to hunt the demigod. Humph, in order to ensure that there aren't any problems, I can also make a request to Ma'am Hermit for help. She's already a demigod and can lurk in the darkness. She can then combine forces with Mr. World at the critical moment. That way, Vin Rambus likely wouldn't be able to escape. Audrey pursed her lips as she held back from grinding her teeth. As for how the hermit was to come to Backland, she didn't find it problematic. She could rent Lamino's travels and get Mr. World to record teleport before requesting Mr. Fool to pass it to her. But this way, even if Vin Rambus didn't manage to escape, the psychology alchemists would have ample reason to suspect that the murderer was the last person the demigod had interacted with, Audrey herself. And this means that there would be countless troubles in the future. Audrey's eyes shifted slightly as she tried hard to calm herself down. At that moment, the white-side-burned and elegant Dwayne Dantes returned from the washroom. He smiled and greeted the noble lady who was waiting for him. After letting his valet, Enuni, guard the door, this tycoon looked around before finally turning his gaze to Audrey. "You seem to have encountered some difficulty?" Audrey didn't interpret Mr. World's actions and replied frankly, "Yes." She gave a description of what she had encountered and said, "What should I do to solve the problem?" What she really meant was how she could avoid leaving behind any remnant problems for the future. Klein smiled and said, "Why don't you discuss it with the two ladies?" "That's right. Like Mr. Moon, we can request for a private mini-gathering." "Oh, Judgment Zio. The Magician Furs will definitely participate. Apart from them, I can also invite Mr. World, Mr. Hanged Man, Ma'am Hermit, Mr. Moon. I can count him out." Audrey felt excited for some baffling reason. At this moment, she felt as though she wasn't fighting alone. "I understand." Audrey nodded with a smile. She then thought of another problem and quickly took the opportunity to ask, "Vin Rambus has made me no longer reject the princes and praise them in front of my parents. What's his motive?" Klein thought for a moment and said, "Perhaps it's to show some kind of friendliness on the surface. It's to rope in your father and make a hint to the Church of Evernight behind him. Regardless of the king's secret, whether it succeeds or not, he will definitely need at least one Orthodox Church's support so as to reduce the opposing forces." "Is that so?" Audrey didn't really reject Mr. World's explanation. This was the politics she was familiar with if she stripped off the outer shell that involved Beyonder powers. She didn't stay any longer and returned to her own office. After settling her daily affairs, she grasped her afternoon break and prayed to Mr. Fool and applied for a mini-gathering to be convened. Above the endless grayish-white fog, dark red beams rose up around the long bronze table. Audrey looked around, stood up, and curtsied to the other members. "Everyone, I have something I wish to hear from you." "It sounds urgent." Alger nodded gently and replied. Audrey sat down and said, "Yes." She then looked at Zio and Furs. "I met Vin Rambis this morning. He hypnotized me to do 2 things for him and to forget his appearance. Fortunately, I was quite careful and cautious. I quickly discovered something odd, and thanks to Mr. Fool's blessings, I remembered everything. One of the things Vin Rambis asked me to do was to arrange for a meeting with Miss Magician and Miss Judgment and take the opportunity to hypnotize them. I'll then obtain intel on the instigator for the actions they had recently taken, and also get them to leave Backlund as quickly as possible." "What?" Furs was originally worried about Miss Justice's safety, but she never expected things to make one rotation before coming back at her and Zio. To think they targeted Miss Audrey. It's really hard to guard against them. She's targeted by a demigod. After a moment of shock, Furs felt more astonished and afraid. She couldn't help but look at her friend and saw Zio sitting calmly, but her hands had unconsciously clenched into fists. Katlia didn't understand something as she frowned and asked, "The psychology alchemists, or should I say Vin Rambis, discovered that Miss Judgment and Miss Judgment are members of our tarot club?" This was a very serious and crucial matter. Audrey shook her head and said, "No, it's only because I know them in the real world." At that moment, she no longer tried to hide her identity from Furs and Zio. In fact, ever since Zio joined the club and obtained the judgment card, Audrey knew that she would be exposed sooner or later. Through repeated observations, she had confirmed that her 2 friends had already guessed it, but they tacitly didn't expose her. "You know them?" Katlia asked in surprise as she adjusted her heavy glasses. Audrey nodded. "Yes, they were actually recommended by me. Mr. Hanged Man can testify." "Ah? Didn't we chant Mr. Fool's honorific name because we wanted to save ourselves and get pulled in here? How did it become a recommendation process?" Furs looked at Miss Justice blankly before glancing at Zio, her face blank and confused. Zio also had that rare, similar expression because the word recommended had exceeded what she knew as well as her speculations. Audrey felt a little embarrassed. She blinked and explained to her 2 friends, "Because all of you have your own special qualities, and I also hope that the Tarot Club will develop and expand, I recommended the 2 of you to Mr. Fool. However, this was just a chance for you. If you hadn't passed Mr. Fool's test, he wouldn't have pulled you in." "Test? What kind of test did I undergo?" Furs was still confused. As for Zio, she thought of many things, especially the origins of the paper that had Mr. Fool's honorific name, as well as her frantic search for an exorcism. "No wonder I had an inkling that they knew each other. No wonder Miss Judgment only entered the club after so long. This was probably due to their different individual experiences. Each of them has their own specialties. This specialty is the selection criteria? Do I have one?" Katlia came to a realization as she came up with a theory. Upon seeing this, Alger, who had some level of judgment regarding this, wasn't at all surprised as he chuckled and said, "We can talk about this in the future. Miss Justice, the problem you would like to ask about is how to deal with Vin Rambis?" "Yes." Audrey returned to the topic and asked seriously, "If we not only have to deal with Vin Rambis but all the psychology alchemists from suspecting me, what should I do?" Alger didn't have any experience in dealing with a demigod, so all he could do was rely on his insight that had been built up over the years. He deliberated and said, "Lock onto the whereabouts of Vin Rambis. Only take action after he has interacted with someone else?" "How do I lock onto him?" Audrey asked the question herself before giving the answer. After getting the answer from Miss Judgment and Miss Magician, I'll wait until Vin Rambis leaves after I meet him again. Then, I'll recite Mr. Fool's honorific name and ask him to cast his gaze on the demigod. Theoretically, it's possible. My true vision above the gray fog has a radius of nearly 10 kilometers. As long as Vin Rambis doesn't know teleport, I can confirm his location and trajectory for a short period of time. Then, I can return to the real world and directly teleport over. This will require the help of divination. But the problem is that it requires the Fool to personally intervene. As the world Gehrman Sparrow, Klein said in a hoarse voice, "Let me remind you of something. Miss Judgment and Miss Magician had mentioned Adam in the real world. The psychology alchemists originated from the ruins of Hermes, who is a member of the Twilight Hermit Order. And Mr. Fool doesn't wish to be at odds with the Twilight Hermit Order because of this matter. Even if we were to do anything, we must try not to let the other party know. Chapter 1048 Real and Fake. Spy 1 in the ancient palace above the grey fog. With the world Gairman Sparrow's words coming to an end, no one spoke for a moment. The entire place was silent. The psychology alchemists are cooperating with the king's faction and are investigating Xiao and I. The founding of the psychology alchemists originated from the discovery of a Hermes ruins, and Hermes is a member of the Twilight Hermit Order. Its leader happens to be Angel of Imagination Adam. And Xiao and I had mentioned Adam in the real world. We're in the sights of a king of angels? Yes. In the world of mysticism, just a slight mistake can result in such dangerous circumstances? Furz's mind was filled with Gairman Sparrow's warnings as she was gripped by horror and panic. Although she had experienced many things in the past, she had never had such a clear realization of the thorny path Beyonders tread. Any mistakes could lead to a terrible consequence. I have to be more cautious in the future. Of course, the premise is that I can survive under the watch of King of Angels Adam. May Mr. Fool bless me. Furz seriously reflected on the matter and silently prayed. Xiao also didn't expect her situation to be so perilous. She didn't expect that something like this would involve a king of angels. She couldn't help but feel horrified and fearful, but she had already decided to sacrifice herself for the truth. She rapidly calmed down, but couldn't help but shoot a glance at the magician, feeling guilty for pulling her good friend into this conundrum. At this point in time, crying and feeling remorse won't solve the problem anymore. All I can do is try my best to keep Furz alive at the critical moment. Fortunately, there's still Mr. Fool's blessings. Xiao cast her gaze at Justice Audrey as she thought to herself. Then what should we do next? She had mixed feelings towards Miss Justice's recommendation. On the one hand, she knew that Audrey thought highly of the Tarot Club and had recommended her purely out of good intentions. On the other hand, she felt that she had gained the notice of a secret existence for no good reason. Thankfully it was Mr. Fool, or she would have died a tragic death long ago. Even her soul wouldn't be able to receive deliverance. Well, I guess it's because I voluntarily chanted Mr. Fool's honorific name that I was dragged into it. There wasn't any coercion. Ultimately, I'm sitting here of my own volition. It has nothing to do with Miss Justice. Also, if it weren't for her recommendation, I might never have such an opportunity to grow stronger to seek out the truth. Xiao pursed her lips as she furtively took a deep breath. Justice Audrey knew about the relationship between the Twilight Hermit Order, Hermes, and Adam, so she was the calmest one there. She just never expected that Furz and Xiao's casual mention of the Angel of Imagination had garnered his attention. This made her have an unprecedented awareness of the horror behind the words. Any mention of it will be known. After some deliberation, Audrey looked at the world Gairman Sparrow and tried to interpret his words. Does Mr. Fool mean that he doesn't want to directly make an enemy of the Twilight Hermit Order at the moment? Does that mean that it can be done indirectly? Klein nodded slightly and said, that should be the case. Does it involve interfering with divination, one's attention and prophecies? Audrey asked. At this mini-gathering, the world Gairman Sparrow represented the will of the fool. Klein laughed and hoarsely said, perhaps a little more indirect. He answered vaguely because the fool hadn't thought of what to do either. Their conversation seemed to inspire Alger. He looked at Justice, the Magician, and Judgment, one after another. Which of you is a believer of the Evernight Goddess? He was almost certain that at least one of the three ladies believed in the Evernight Goddess. After all, among the people of Lone and the residents of Backland, the standards for women, and those who had been educated, these filtered out most of the believers of other deities. I am, Xiao said without hiding anything. Audrey raised her hand slightly. Seeing this, Alger nodded slightly. We can try to mislead someone and make it seem like the Church of Evernight did something against Vin Rambus, not the Tarot Club. As he said this, Alger skillfully changed the pronoun he used to refer to the group. He was only invited to be a consultant, and wouldn't actually be involved in the matter. He should have said you should do this and that, but he had chosen to use we. Pushing the blame to the Church of Evernight. This line of thought seems really familiar. Klein in his The World Gairman Sparrow's manifestation suddenly found it amusing. Then how should the misdirection be done? Audrey's eyes shifted slightly as she hurriedly asked. Alger looked around and said, Vin Rambus only hypnotized you to not seek blessings and sit in key spots at the Church of Evernight's Mass where you can be cleansed to a certain degree. But he didn't ask you to avoid the Church of Evernight's Archbishop. You can use this to create an opportunity. Meet the Archbishop. Of course, there's no need to say anything. This way, when Vin Rambus dies or vanishes, the psychology alchemists will most probably suspect that the Church of Evemight had detected something wrong with you and had set up a trap. Without waiting for Miss Justice to respond, he looked at Zio. After you're hypnotized but before you leave Backland, head to the nearest Church of the Evernight Goddess and pray seriously. Act like a spy sent by the Church of Evernight to infiltrate the Tarot Club. This will misdirect the psychology alchemists into believing that the matters pertaining to Vin Rambus were done by the Tarot Club, but was in fact a smokescreen. The true mastermind behind all of this is the Church of Evemight, acting like a spy in the Tarot Club that was sent by the Church of Evernight. Well, Klein felt a little guilty. He was a genuine blessed of Evernight, and Leonard was a genuine red glove. It should be said that the Tarot Club's convener and host, Mr. Fool, also draws the crimson moon on his chest. Klein muttered in amusement and helplessness. As a result, he was also rather inspired. This can only fool typical Beyonders. Without the blessings of Mr. Fool's angel, the higher-ups of the psychology alchemists can easily figure out the truth, Katlia reminded. The Hanged Man replied, so the main point is that we should be indirectly blessed by Mr. Fool. Otherwise, would it be impossible for us to deceive the Spectator Pathways King of Angels, Adam? Also, Miss Magician and Miss Judgment, when you pray at the Cathedral of the Evernight Goddess, it's best if you pray to Mr. Fool and get his help in extricating yourself from the hypnosis and not immediately leave Backland. Under such circumstances, Backland is safer than anywhere else. All right, Zio replied seriously. Seeing that the discussion had reached this point, Audrey and the others all looked towards the World Gehrman Sparrow, awaiting his response. Klein's thoughts had already taken shape. He deliberated for a moment, then laughed hoarsely. Actually, there are simpler ways to interfere. What methods are there? Audrey's eyes widened as she asked with concern. Klein looked at Miss Justice and pointed at the top of his head. Once Vin Rambus leaves, bum that hat accessory and trigger the charm I gave you. That feather hat accessory? The hat accessory that can get a so-called response from death? Mr. World hopes to get this existence to disrupt the divination, attention and prophecy. Audrey's green eyes sparkled as she nodded in thought. I know what to do. When that happens, the response would be the power of concealment. This way, no matter what happens, Adam can only assume that the goddess had interfered, believing that she had blessed the Hall family and has nothing to do with the Tarot Club. I wonder if the goddess will send Ma'am Ariana. That way, finishing off Vin Rambus will be made very simple. If not, I'll give myself Angel's Embrace ahead of time and use my marionettes which are dead. That will result in a high chance of victory. Klein mumbled inwardly without saying anything else. Justice Audrey quickly completed her plan, doing so as though she was talking to herself as she spoke to Zio and Furs. Visit me on Wednesday afternoon. This way, I'll have a chance to see the Church of Evernight's Archbishop in advance. I'll pray to Mr. Fool for him, to provide his angelic blessings. That way, I won't be hypnotized by Vin Rambus when I meet him. We'll act once he leaves. Vin Rambus is a cautious and conservative person. He should continue choosing to meet me on the way to prevent himself from being caught or from falling into a trap. Soon, amidst the discussions of the other members of the Tarot Club, the plan was complete. The World Gehrman Sparrow declined Katlia's suggestion of providing help. After all, he couldn't guarantee that powerhouses from the Church of Evernight would be involved. As for the payment, all the spoils would belong to the world, and Audrey would provide him with a free help commission according to his request. On Wednesday afternoon, in Viscount Glaint's residence. After returning to the Turf Club, Audrey, who was wearing a simple white dress shirt and a pair of pants of the same, bright leather boots, and a black leather jacket that clung to her waist, stood inside the Viscount's study and looked at Zio and Furs. Who got you to investigate Viscount Stratford and pursue the king's secret? Her green eyes were like an ancient pool of water in a deep mountain. It was quiet, deep and clear, making one unknowingly sink into it. At this moment, Zio and Furs were really hypnotized. The former answered in a daze. It was me. I'm investigating the cause of my father's death. However, I do pray to a particular existence to bless me. Audrey asked a few more questions and received a satisfactory answer. Then she said with a gentle voice, "Leave Backland and leave this place. You don't belong here. All right, you'll wake up when you hear me clap." The moment she said that, Audrey clapped her hands and saw Xiao and Fur's eyes regain their clarity. After exchanging a few more pleasantries, Xiao and Furs bade her farewell and left. Audrey began to wait patiently. She planned to stay inside Viscount Glaint's residence for another half an hour. She was waiting for Xiao to enter the nearest Evernight Goddess Cathedral and finish her prayers before heading elsewhere. This way, regardless of whether Vin Rambus appeared en route or elsewhere, she would be prepared. Picking up the lady's bonnet with a white feather accessory, Audrey walked out of the study, planning to meet up with Susie and Annie first before chatting with Glaint to kill time. She had just taken 2 steps when she heard a gentle and smiling voice. "Well done." Audrey's pupils dilated as she hurriedly turned her head, only to see a silver-haired man standing next to an elegant wall lamp rack. His eyes were light blue, and his clothes were neat. He was none other than Vin Rambus. This demigod was actually waiting in Viscount Glaint's residence for Audrey to complete the hypnosis and receive the answer. At this moment, Xiao and Furs probably hadn't walked out the main door. This was completely outside Audrey's expectations and the Hanged Man's analysis. This meant that Vin Rambus was present, so there was no need to question the target through Audrey. Being in the vicinity and personally hypnotizing them was just as dangerous. 1049 Spectators' intuition. How did this happen? Even if Xiao and Furs didn't meet with any delays en route and maintain a relatively fast speed, it would take at least 15 minutes to arrive at the nearest Evernight Cathedral. Luckily, I was cautious enough and had prayed to Mr. Fool for an angelic blessing ahead of time. I also actually hypnotized Xiao and Furs. An upheaval of thoughts instantly ran through her mind before she rapidly suppressed them. At first, she looked confused, and then her face wore a look of realization. It was as if she had finally woken up from her long dream and remembered the things that had been neglected. "Mr. Rambus, why are you here?" Audrey made her voice sound ethereal, as though she was still in a dreamy stupor. As she spoke, she made use of the control of her emotions as a psychiatrist to make an unavoidable hint of anxiety flash through her mind, doing so without causing any abnormalities. This unexpected turn of events made her unsure of how to proceed. Without a doubt, she understood that she had to first deal with Vin Rambus's subsequent questions so that the demigod wouldn't suspect anything. However, if that was the case, he would leave in 3 to 5 minutes after he was done asking. As for Xiao and Furs, they definitely wouldn't have entered an Evernight Cathedral yet. This inhibited the step needed for the misdirection, and when the time came, igniting the hat accessory and summoning the world easily exposed flaws in the handling of matters in the end. They wouldn't be able to completely fix the inherent problems. No, I'd rather miss this opportunity than proceed with the plan without being fully prepared. Patience, tolerance, and caution are key in the mysterious world. At the very least, Vin Rambus will be making use of me for a long period of time and not directly harm me. He wishes that I marry with some prince, and this process will take more than half a year. I still have plenty of time. I can wait for the 2nd, 3rd, or even 4th or 5th opportunity. The only problem is that I need to inform Xiao and Furs and get them to really hide as quickly as possible. Audrey quickly came up with a decision as her eyes restored to normal while showing hints of wariness and fear. After observing her reaction and hearing her question, Vin Rambus smiled and said, "This should be your first time hypnotizing someone, and I was worried that an accident would happen, so I specially came here to wait." "Heh, given your background, you don't usually have the chance to do this." His voice was gentle and laced with concern. It made the wariness and fear in Audrey's eyes subside bit by bit. But in Audrey's mind world, she once again felt her consciousness being split apart. Some of them were raised, looking down at the island and the sea. This made her clearly realize that her fond feelings and sense of security that she had just felt were all artificial. Seeing that Audrey had returned to normal, Vin Rambus nodded and said, "How did they answer your question just now?" Audrey honestly said, "Xiao said that the investigation of Viscount Stratford and the pursuit of the king's secret was all of her own will. She was very suspicious about the death of her father. Her father was the former captain of the Royal Guards, Earl Mason Deer. However, she mentioned that her actions were blessed by a certain existence." As she answered, Audrey almost stopped talking. This was because her spirituality high in the sky was looking down at herself, one on the island of consciousness and the spiritual sea. She saw a figure rising up from the bottom of the sea as it followed up steps that appeared, passing through the subconscious realm and landing on her body of heart and mind's island. The figure was wearing a black three-piece suit, with a head full of silver hair. It was another Vin Rambis. There wasn't a hint of a smile on Vin Rambis's face. He had an extremely sinister air, and a part of his skin was covered in grayish-white scales. Not only did his eyes turn from pale blue to golden, they also turned vertical, looky happy face like a particular animal. If it weren't for the fact that she had experienced something like this before, just the intense level of nervousness she currently felt might have prevented Audrey from acting as though she hadn't noticed anything while ensuring that she didn't stop speaking or end up stammering. In the real world, Vin Rambis smiled as he looked at Audrey's pretty face and asked further, "Which existence's blessings?" Audrey shook her head as the island of consciousness began to change. When this matter was raised, Xiao and Furs became very resistant. There were signs of escaping the hypnosis, so I didn't dare continue asking. Of course, the blessings of a particular existence could be explained as Mr. Fool's attention, and it could also be understood as the goddesses. The lucid Audrey muttered silently under the spiritual sky. Vin Rambis continued to circle around the questions and asked about the details of the hypnosis. After 2 or 3 minutes, he nodded satisfactorily and said, "Not bad. You do have a gift in hypnotizing people. When the recent events come to a close, I will give you the Dreamwalker potion and personally host the ritual for you. Oh yes, don't reject love and marriage too much. You're not even 20 years old, and it's the perfect time to pursue such matters. Your charm is enough to gain everyone's affection and enjoy their attention." Vin Rambis used an indirect hint and guidance to lower Audrey's resistance towards love and marriage. This detestable guy. Audrey puffed up her cheeks under her spiritual sky and muttered resentfully. She then controlled herself to reveal some shyness and longing. Vin Rambis didn't expect to succeed by simply following a logical process. Seeing this, he retracted his invading consciousness and allowed himself to leave the island. He turned around and said, "Forget what I just said. They're all spontaneous thoughts from your heart. After I leave this place and disappear from your sight, you'll forget that I was here." Upon hearing this, Audrey under the spiritual sky couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. This meant that Vin Rambis was about to leave. Even though it had only been 5 minutes since his appearance, making it insufficient for Xiao and Furs to enter the nearest Evernight Cathedral, Audrey was still eager for Vin Rambis to leave as soon as possible. To face off a demigod of the spectator domain was unimaginably stressful. There's still a chance after this. As long as I maintain my consciousness, there will still be a chance. Audrey, don't be depressed, don't be impatient. Audrey silently consoled herself as she watched Vin Rambis turn around and walk towards the hall. She didn't relax and didn't breathe. She tried her best to maintain her normal state. Suddenly, Vin Rambis stopped in his tracks and turned around. He narrowed his pale blue eyes and looked at Audrey. "Why were you so scared when you first saw me?" I was too surprised at that time, so I didn't manage to hide some of my emotions well." Audrey felt her scalp tingle under her long blonde hair as her thoughts whirled quickly. She asked, puzzled, "Really? Isn't this normal?" Someone suddenly appeared beside me. "A brief shock is inevitable." Vin Rambis nodded, as if agreeing with this explanation. He sized up Audrey and suddenly said, "You used to carry a mystical item that can change one's form with you as an accessory. Why didn't you wear it today?" To a spectator, this detail was an abnormality. "Oh no. I've been hiding Lai beneath my clothes most of the time. How did he notice that I wasn't wearing it this time? He has secretly read some of my memories that I didn't protect to appear normal." Faced with Vin Rambis's question, Audrey felt her thoughts stagnant. The reason why she wasn't wearing Lai was simple. She was afraid that this accessory would amplify her emotions, preventing her from being able to completely hide her true thoughts when facing a demigod from the spectator pathway. This meant that she had predicted that she would meet Vin Rambis today. This was something that shouldn't have happened under normal circumstances. In the blink of an eye, Audrey grabbed onto an idea and smiled blankly. "It will amplify my emotions and reduce the success rate of the hypnosis attempt. I removed it in advance to avoid any accidents." Vin Rambis nodded and said, "So that's the reason." Just as Audrey was feeling a little relaxed, this spectator pathway's demigod suddenly narrowed his eyes. "If it's just this matter, there's nothing worth suspecting. But compared to when you saw me, The fear that slightly exceeded normal limits seems to imply something. As he said that, Vin Rambise's light blue eyes turned vertical and was quickly dyed with the color of gold. The two golden vertical pupils clearly reflected Audrey's image in her rider's attire. With a buzz, Audrey's thoughts became extremely muddled. Only the her, under the spiritual sky, barely remained conscious. The surface of the spiritual sea surrounding the island surged with waves, enveloping it. At the same time, the sinister-looking Vin Rambis returned to the island and stopped beneath the sea surface, allowing patches of grayish-white dragon scales to fly into the foundation of the island where most of a human's subconscious lay. Audrey suddenly felt her thoughts twist, prompting her to say everything, confessing all her secrets. Relying on the lucidity of herself under the spiritual sky, she barely controlled herself and didn't reveal anything. She also knew that there would definitely be problems if this continued, so she quickly diverted some of her thoughts and, relying on the angelic blessing and her splintered consciousness, prevent Vin Rambis from noticing it. Some of those thoughts included reaching her hand into her left pocket. Just then, Vin Rambis, who had invaded her mind world, looked increasingly sinister as he snorted. There really is a problem. If there wasn't a problem, Audrey would have started with the most important matters, revealing all her secrets and private matters one by one, instead of staying silent. Likewise, since the manipulation attempt happened so quickly, Audrey didn't have the time to sort out all her secrets. Even if she wanted to hide anything, her lucidity would be discovered the moment she spoke. After confirming that something was off, Vin Rambis didn't hesitate any longer. His gaze turned extremely cold as grayish-white scales covered his skin. The storm in the spiritual sea suddenly intensified, and Audrey, who was under the spiritual sky, staggered. The last bastion of the defenses of her consciousness was rapidly weakening under the repeated attacks, putting it on the verge of shattering. Humph! Vin Rambis increased the force of the mind storm once again, feeling satisfied that Audrey's entire island was shaking. This meant that he was about to completely control her. At this moment, he heard an ancient word. Fate. In the real world, Vin Rambis looked up in surprise. All he saw was that Audrey's green eyes were dyed with the brightest, the most dazzling gold. Chapter 1050. Good at using hypnosis. As the ancient Hermes words resounded, the areas where Audrey and Vin Rambis stood dimmed. It was as if someone had passed by, blocking the window that was closest to them, then quickly left. By the time the light returned, the island filled with a terrifying mind storm in the illusory world had transformed from Audrey's to Vin Rambis's. The person that had intruded on the other party's body of heart and mind went from Vin Rambis to Audrey. Fate Siphon Charm. This was made using a worm of time as the material. Using the Fool's powers, this charm was created. It could siphon off a corresponding target's subsequent fate for a short period of time, exchanging the corresponding fate with the user. It was the consultation fee Audrey had received from Gehrman Sparrow after she treated Hazel's mental breakdown. With the corresponding charm, she could divert her future of having her consciousness defenses broken and losing control over her thoughts to Vin Rambis. She then siphoned off the mind storm from him and opened her target's door to the body of heart and mind. She then directly altered and planted the corresponding consciousness's fate. In an instant, the situation reversed. Audrey went from the edge of collapse to gaining the absolute advantage. Of course, this advantage could only last for a short period of time. Frankly speaking, if it weren't for her imagining how she could save herself in a desperate situation, Audrey definitely wouldn't have thought of using the Fate Siphon charm. Or it could be said that by the time she thought of it, it would be too late. At this moment, just like how she had practiced it countless times in her mind, she suppressed her surprised emotions from the effects of the Fate Siphon charm and quickly confirmed her condition. With her current advantage, she made the hypnosis and mind storm swirl together, instantly opening Vin Rambis's door to his body of heart and mind. Vin Rambis was instantly dumbfounded, as if he was an ordinary person whose attention had been diverted to Audrey's golden eyes and thus fall under her hypnosis. Yes, at this moment, as a demigod of the spectator pathway, he had been controlled by Audrey, who was only a sequence 6. This way, even if the effects of the Fate Siphon charm came to an end, it wouldn't change the development in the real world. However, Audrey knew that, with the help of the magical charm, she was using Vin Rambis's powers to open the door to his body of heart and mind and achieve initial control. Whatever she wanted to do later would definitely be rejected by him. And with her sequence level, she had no means to resist or control such intense power. Furthermore, she could clearly sense that Vin Rambis was subconsciously resisting his current state. In the real world, A small amount of gray scales began to appear on his face. In no time, he would be able to forcefully extricate himself from the state of my initial control over his mind. A realization flashed across Audrey's mind. She then cast her gaze towards Vin Rambise's head, feeling a little regretful that she didn't carry a powerful revolver with her. Otherwise, she could take this opportunity to shoot at him several times in a row in an attempt to kill him. Soon, she recalled that she had dragon scales. She believed that Vin Rambis definitely had it, and that it was even stronger. It wasn't something an ordinary attack could tear through. Even most mystical items that were at the mid or low sequences couldn't do so. And if she couldn't kill him in one shot, Vin Rambis would definitely be able to use this opportunity to regain consciousness and escape her control. Without any hesitation, Audrey, who lacked the appropriate offensive abilities, quickly came to a decision. Hypnotize him. He's best at hypnotizing and is very resistant against this, so he wouldn't prepare any additional items that can affect his defense. I can't let him do things that will be against his will. With our difference in levels, I definitely can't resist the corresponding subconscious resistance he puts up. Thoughts ran through Audrey's mind as she spread her slightly parched lips. She tried hard not to show any signs of abnormality as she looked into Vin Rambise's eyes and said in a gentle voice, "Find a spot inside Glaine's mansion and wait. Find me in the garden 15 minutes later." Such a subconscious thought didn't stir any obvious signs of being rejected. Therefore, Audrey was able to complete her control rather smoothly. To Vin Rambis, he was indeed looking for Audrey today, and the venue for the meeting was also Viscount Glaine's mansion. Audrey's hypnosis was simply changing the corresponding time and place, and the discrepancies were just in a very small aspect. It matched Vin Rambise's thoughts and didn't waste too much of his effort. Therefore, she didn't encounter any intense resistance. "All right," Vin Rambis responded to Audrey's words. Audrey didn't care to let out a sigh of relief. She focused and continued looking into the other party's eyes. She gently said, "You will only come looking for me in 15 minutes, so you haven't seen me today. Since you haven't seen me, everything that happened just now definitely didn't happen. They will be forgotten." As Vin Rambis had accepted the hypnosis, he followed the logical train of thought. Although there was resistance, it wasn't anything intense. Soon, the golden light disappeared from those alluring eyes. "Yes, I haven't seen you before. Nothing happened just now," Vin Rambis repeated with a blank expression. The grayish-white scales on the surface of his skin had increased significantly again. After completing this crucial step, Audrey resisted the urge to pat her chest and thought for a second. "When you hear my singing, it will become quiet." She wanted to hypnotize him with her charm, but she realized that she wasn't able to take on a seductive pose, and she couldn't make the corresponding expressions. She could only lift her hand to comb her blonde hair and tilt her head. The ripples in her eyes swirled as her smile beamed. Following that, she hummed a melody, "Manor Under the Moon" in a nasal voice. Vin Rambis looked at the girl in front of him who looked as beautiful as sunlight, flowers, and gems. Listening to the ethereal voice, his mind gradually turned silent, as he no longer had any resistance. Seeing that her initial control was about to be released, Audrey didn't hesitate and pointed to the other side of the corridor. "Go over there, and you will regain consciousness and dispel dragon scales when you see the stained glass." She knew very well that on the other side of the corridor, there were exquisite white stained glass. This order didn't pose any danger, nor did it violate Vin Rambise's will. He immediately took a step forward, walked down the corridor, and turned right. Only when his back disappeared from her sights did Audrey slowly exhale, allowing the fear, alarm, and anxiety to surge into her heart. Her body trembled slightly as she opened her mouth slightly. She couldn't help but gasp and exhale. 10 seconds later, Audrey used placate on herself and calmed herself down. Then she glanced at the wall clock and stood there, raising her hands and placing them in front of her mouth and nose, reciting Mr. Fool's honorific name in a low voice. She prayed for an angelic blessing again and requested this great existence to tell the world Gairman Sparrow that she had confirmed when Vin Rambis would arrive and would summon him 2 minutes ahead of time, allowing him to arrive at the appropriate moment. There was no need to be in a rush or to be too close to prevent Vin Rambis from being aware of an ambush. During this process, Audrey only briefly mentioned what had happened. She didn't elaborate on it to prevent wasting any time. Following that, she raised her hands and pressed her cheeks, completely restoring her expression to normal. She began hypnotizing herself, allowing herself to sing the melody the moment she saw Vin Rambus. After doing all of this, Audrey went to the main hall and first found the golden retriever, Susie. She then retrieved the lie necklace and the alcohol nemesis diamond brooch. The latter, which could resist any mental influence, could only be worn for half an hour. Otherwise, the damage one's liver and brain suffered would be irreversible. Therefore, Audrey prepared to wear them again after she left Glaine's residence to prevent Vin Rambus from finding her midway. Susie didn't notice anything amiss with Audrey as she watched her wear the brooch and necklace. After a few minutes, Audrey folded a black fishnet glove into her equestrian pocket and used the excuse of going to the washroom, making a detour to Viscount Glaine's garden. Then, she looked at the large clock hung up on the attached tower, her mind tensing up as she memorized the time. To her, she was afraid that Vin Rambus wouldn't come, but she was also worried that he might come early or be late. Time passed by slowly and Audrey used placate twice to calm herself down. When there was still 2 minutes and 15 seconds left, she took off the feather accessory on her hat and flicked her wrist. The scarlet flame soared, igniting the white feather. This was Lie's flame-controlling ability. As the flames burned, they turned pale. In just 2 or 3 seconds, the feather, which was a product of artificial death, was reduced to ashes. Nothing happened around her. Looking at the clock, Audrey took out a charm made of tin and recited a word in ancient Hermes: lightning. The charm lit up as though many tiny electric snakes were entangling with it. It was a charm that summoned Gehrman's sparrow. When the lightning dissipated, the charm completely disintegrated and melted into the void. However, there was still silence without so much as a sound. Zio and Furs should have found a church of Evernight Cathedral and begun praying. Audrey calmed down and pretended to enjoy the flowers of the remaining autumn days. She didn't lift her head to look at the large clock, counting the time in her heart. 3, 2, 1. She slowly raised her head and looked around, but she didn't see Vin Rambus. He discovered something strange and distanced himself from this place? Audrey's heart tightened as she couldn't help but think back to what she had missed. At that moment she heard a gentle voice. "What are you looking for?" Audrey's pupils dilated. From the corner of her eye, she realized that the silver-haired, blue-eyed Vin Rambus had appeared beside her at some point in time, a hint of suspicion hidden in his voice. Having already hypnotized herself, she didn't hesitate at all. She followed her subconscious and started humming the melodic manner under the moon. Amidst the ethereal voice, Vin Rambus calmed down and listened attentively. Suddenly, he realized that the distance between him and Audrey had become very far despite them remaining in their respective spots. The dark night enveloped the garden despite it being late in the afternoon. A huge crimson moon rose over the top of the building as a figure stood there, wearing a black trench coat and a half-top hat. His face looked hazy due to the backlighting. 1051 different styles of different pathways. Upon seeing this scene, Vin Rambus immediately extricated himself from that state of calm, clearly aware that he had fallen into a trap. He also further realized that he was already under some sort of influence. Without any hesitation, he arched his back and his body swelled. His pupils turned vertical, turning from pale blue to golden. His face, the back of his hand, and every inch of his exposed skin grew grayish-white scales. Amidst the screeching sound, the white shirt, black vest, formal coat, and straight trousers that he wore tore apart, revealing the dragon scales beneath. In the blink of an eye, Vin Rambus had transformed into an abnormally massive monster. Aside from his head that remained in the form of a human, the rest of his body had changed completely. It was like a dragon that had yet to fully evolve. The dragon's back was covered in gray-skinned wings, and its limbs were thick. The grayish-white scales were engraved with complicated, three-dimensional mysterious symbols. They extended into the flesh, extending into the surrounding void. It seemed to be a mesh of objects that didn't belong to the real world. It threw anyone who laid their eyes upon it into suffering a form of mental confusion as their thoughts warped. Even one's spirit body would be tainted with all kinds of thoughts that came from deep within one's heart, eager to rip apart and mutilate themselves. This was the spectator pathway's incomplete mythical creature form. For demigods of other pathways, those who weren't at the angel level, they required immense willpower and firm beliefs to fight in their mythical creature forms. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to control the madness and the inclination of losing control. There was a high chance of them immediately losing all rationality and transforming into a monster. However, the spectator pathway was different. They had placate which could treat their minds and souls, so they weren't helpless towards the madness and inclination of losing control. Therefore, as long as the fight wasn't prolonged, they could use their mythical creature form and return to normal at will. Whoosh! All the thoughts in Vin Rambise's subconscious domain boiled over as they churned, identifying the parts of his consciousness that had been altered, purging them out and melting them down into nothingness. Whoosh! The violent winds surged around Vin Rambise's grayish-white dragon avatar. It seemed to come from reality, but also seemed to come from an illusory world. They carried a certain will as they whirled in every direction. Any creature that was embroiled would inevitably be placed into various abnormal states, stand rooted to the ground in a daze, or blindly escape towards the corners of the garden. There would be varying degrees of losing of control as their knees would buckle before they slumped to the ground. Some would even faint immediately and fall into a coma. Others would reveal their most fervent expressions, crowding around the dragon-like attendants. This was a qualitative change in dragon might, which stemmed from a mythical creature form. It went from its original state of placing others in a state of awe to mind deprivation, with even more effects. Seizing the moment when dragon might swept the surroundings, Vin Rambis focused and transformed into illusory, sinister versions of himself. Through the sea of collective subconscious which eluded most beyonders, he approached Gairman Sparrow on the rooftop and Audrey Hall by the garden's periphery at high speeds. As a spectator, he could tell that the attacker was Gairman Sparrow just by seeing his face and temperament. At this moment, Audrey was mumbling to herself and compelling herself based on the discussions and warnings from the two demigods, the world and the hermit, above the grey fog. I can't see anything. I can't hear anything. I can't see anything. I can't hear anything. She was trying to avoid losing control from looking directly at Vin Rambise's mythical creature form. However, this also made her unable to see, or sense that a particular illusory, sinister version of Vin Rambis was approaching her body of heart and mind from the sea of collective subconscious. But suddenly, before Vin Rambise's eyes, the blonde green-eyed girl's island of consciousness disappeared. Audrey felt a warmth from her body, as if she had returned from a cold, dark cave to the surface where the sun shined. She hurriedly dispelled the hypnosis and opened her eyes. The sun in the sky pierced through the clouds that couldn't be considered thin, scattering its resplendence. Bathed in the bright golden glow, autumn flowers bloomed in silence. Everything was beautiful and peaceful. Audrey looked around blankly, but she didn't see Vin Rambis, Gairman Sparrow, or the huge crimson moon. This made her feel like everything that she had just experienced was just a dream. What mighty powers! A battle between the two demigods might not even harm a single flower. Audrey silently muttered to herself before calmly leaving the garden, retreating to the corridor that connected the garden to the house. She was afraid that her presence would affect Gairman Sparrow's fight. In the concealed world, one of Vin Rambise's manifestations had also landed on Gairman Sparrow's island of consciousness under the crimson moon. Just as he was about to set foot on it and open the door to the body of heart and mind and control Gairman Sparrow's subconscious to make him do things against his own will, he realized that the illusory island that stood in the sea of collective subconscious was filled with a deathly silence. There were no stirring thoughts or the appearance of new thoughts. There was no way of influencing it. Puppet. Marionette. Vin Rambis instantly made a judgment. Combined with the information he had obtained in the past, he had a better grasp of Gairman Sparrow's abilities. He wasn't shocked or depressed. Instead, he felt a sense of glee and confidence. This was because, for a demigod of the spectator pathway, he could easily tell the difference between a marionette and the true body, greatly mitigating Gairman Sparrow's strongest ability. Besides, do you think a marionette can foil my mind invasion and control of one's consciousness? That sinister and illusory Vin Rambis swept his golden vertical eyes and found a transparent passage on the marionette's island of consciousness. On the island of consciousness, it was the symbolic form of spirit body threads in the mind world. Right on the heels of that, Vin Rambise's figure flashed, and he traced the transparent passageway and found another island of consciousness hidden in the distance. This was where the source of where the marionettes were controlled, which meant that it belonged to the actual body. Found you! Vin Rambis snorted coldly as he conjured a terrifying mind storm in the sea of collective subconscious, allowing them to thrash about in Gairman Sparrow's island of consciousness over and over again. This caused the nearby weather to rapidly change, and the ability to percept the surroundings via spirituality suffered intense interference. Vin Rambis took the opportunity to get close to Gairman Sparrow's island of consciousness, and he conjured a grayish-white staircase in an attempt to furtively invade his opponent's subconscious. This was his usual style of fighting. One stayed in the light while the other stayed in the dark. While one attacked head-on, the other sneaked in. With these two angles of attack, it easily broke the target's mental walls and allowed him to control his opponent's body of heart and mind. At the same time, as a dragon avatar, he flew up and spiraled in midair. It affected Gehrman's sparrow with its dragon might and breath, complementing the battle at the consciousness level. At this moment, from deep within the sea of collective subconscious, Vin Rambus had silently invaded the Gehrman sparrow's body of heart and mind when all of a sudden, he saw a boundless grayish-white fog. All the sea of collective subconscious around and the islands had vanished. Vin Rambus's heart tightened as he hurriedly analyzed his psyche, suspecting that he was under an illusion. However, no matter how he handled it, the grayish-white fog didn't change. Of course, there were no accidents or danger. It was as if it was just a simple background. That was pretty suspicious. Just as Vin Rambus was preparing to stir a mind storm here, the grayish-white fog finally dissipated, revealing the island of consciousness from before that belonged to Gehrman's sparrow. Vin Rambus didn't have time to hesitate. He quickly entered the corresponding subconscious and attempted to change his target's thoughts. However, those thoughts were dyed with a bright light, a holy and majestic aura. It was unshakable and uninfluenced. Vin Rambus instinctively looked up and looked towards the sea of consciousness from the stone stairs that he conjured. Other than the island itself, there was also a figure with 12 pairs of fiery wings, emitting golden light. It looked like the projection of an angel's powers. Since he was planning on dealing with a demigod from the spectator pathway today, Klein had no doubt used Angel's Embrace on himself. With the Red Priest's level of importance, he directed the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog, allowing him to temporarily be unaffected when facing an incomplete mythical creature form. And the reason why he didn't show it directly was that he was experimenting with Vin Rambus. As Vin Rambus attempted to invade his island of consciousness, his marionette, Kona's Kilgore, distorted the target his enemy locked onto, changing it from Klein's body of heart and mind to Klein's projection of the gray fog. As a result, if Vin Rambus found the island of consciousness in the grayish-white fog, it meant that there was a being of unknown origin sleeping in the mysterious space. This meant that Klein had to be wary ahead of time. On the contrary, he could feel a little relaxed. This was something he had long wanted to test but didn't dare attempt because it might be dangerous. Today, he finally had a chance to do so. After all, even if there were any consequences, Vin Rambus would be the one dying and not him. It might even allow him to easily finish off a demigod. Seeing that he was blessed by an angel and wasn't capable of breaking or infiltrating his opponent's body of heart and mind in a short period of time and exerting his consciousness on him, Vin Rambus retreated without any hesitation. He left the area and returned to his mind world through the sea of collective subconscious. Then, the massive dragon disappeared, disappearing into thin air, preventing Klein from even finding it via spirit body threads. Psychological invisibility. Vin Rambus planned on using a psychological blind spot to hide in the dark. Then, using area of effect beyonder powers like mind deprivation and mind storm to slowly weaken Gehrman Sparrow's angel-enhanced mental walls, he would attempt using his own sealed artifact to attack. As a demigod of the spectator pathway, although his dragon form was powerful at melee combat, it still lacked the necessary powerful offensive beyonder powers. It had to be made up for through certain sealed artifacts. At this moment, an illusory book appeared in front of the Gehrman Sparrow, who could be either the marionette or his actual self. Following that, there was an ethereal voice. I came, I saw, I record. Klein was using Lightning Storm, which had been recorded by the Creeping Hunger. For something like psychological invisibility, it could be easily resolved with a full area of effect bombardment. It has to be said that, when dealing with a beyonder with such a fighting style, the Storm pathway was a pretty good choice. 1052 3 VL Boom. Lightning bolts descended from the sky, covering the entire area illuminated by the huge crimson moon with a silver forest. Lightning flashed and destructive auras swept over, not leaving any spot unscathed. The giant grayish-white dragon, which still had a human head, appeared again. There were tiny bolts of electric bolts scurrying over its scaled body. There were also some obvious cracks. Vin Rambus's psychological invisibility couldn't be maintained under such a wide area of effect bombardment. After all, his interactions with his surroundings couldn't be avoided. All he could do was eliminate his sense of presence and stay in the blind spot of one's attention. Once the level of interaction grew excessive, he didn't have the means to avoid exposure. As soon as he appeared, the lightning storm calmed down quite significantly. The Gehrman sparrow's body on the roof instantly blurred and phased into existence diagonally below the incomplete dragon. Right on the heels of that, the glove on the crazy adventurer's left hand protruded with fine black particles that were deep and dark. Then, he opened his mouth and said his word filled with foulness and corruption from the devil language. Slow. Vin Rambus knew that his opponent was using creeping hunger and knew the true level of the item. He found Gehrman Sparrow amusing and was about to raise his left claw that grabbed onto an ice-blue metal cylinder, slamming it down at his enemy beneath him. This was a sealed artifact with unknown origins called Rotting Meteor. Vin Rambus had obtained it from a particular existence, and he was only aware that part of it came from the cosmos. This ice-blue metal cylinder could fire special dark green bullets that would instantly poison anyone who was hit with it. They would begin rotting in a way that even their spirit bodies wouldn't be spared. This was also effective against demigods. Its negative effect was that the wielder had a probability of gaining the attention of the cosmos and suffering corruption without realizing it. If not for having the item sealed thanks to a particular existence, Vin Rambus definitely wouldn't have dared to carry it around. But even so, he tried to limit his usage of it, lest he suffered a strange death or anomaly. That was a common ending for many of the previous owners of Rotting Meteor. Currently, Vin Rambus didn't believe that the language of foulness, which was at most at sequence 5, could affect him in his incomplete mythical creature form. He planned on using Rotting Meteor to finish off the sealed artifact-equipped enemy that posed a threat. However, at this moment, his actions had really slowed down, and his entire body felt stiff. On the pitch-black roof under the gigantic crimson moon, another Gehrman sparrow in a black trench coat and silk hat had appeared at some point in time. He held a 6-barreled revolver in his right hand and aimed his left hand at the Gehrman sparrow beneath him before balling his fist and turning his wrist. Earl of the Fallen. Magnify. This was Klein's other marionette, a demigod from the lawyer pathway, Kona's Kilgore. With the help of his Magnify, Creeping Hunger could amplify the beyonder powers it obtained from grazing souls, almost raising it to the level of sequence 4, or in other words, at the level of a demigod. Of course, Magnify couldn't be used consecutively in quick succession. It was limited to a one-time use each time. Due to Vin Rambus's current mythical creature form, no matter how magnified, slow M was, it couldn't affect him for long. Therefore it was the Gehrman sparrow, who was actually Anuni, who had to seize this short opportunity and control Vin Rambus's spirit body threads. Normally, he would take 3 seconds to attain initial control. However, his opponent had already revealed a powerful mythical creature form, and time would definitely extend the time required. It would take perhaps about 7 seconds or even more than 10 seconds to succeed. And by then, Vin Rambus would have long extricated himself from the influence of slow, restoring himself to normal and carrying out the corresponding countermeasures. At this critical moment, Kona's Kilgore aimed his left hand at winner Anuni once again and clenched his fingers. Another Magnify. The control of the spirit body threads was magnified. Suddenly, Anuni's control of Vin Rambus's spirit body threads became easier, as if the mythical creature form hadn't been revealed. In other words, he could obtain initial control in 3 seconds. This was already rather formidable. But the problem was that the dragonified Vin Rambus wouldn't take more than a second to extricate himself from the influence of slow. No, he had already escaped. At that moment, there was a gunshot. A bullet that looked lusterless, deep and profound but not dark, swiftly shot out with its many strange patterns and struck Vin Rambus, who had just escaped from his slow state. In another corner of the garden, another Gehrman sparrow in a black trench coat and a silk top hat appeared. Vin Rambus's dragon body stiffened once again. Not only did his thoughts come to a halt, even the wings on his back froze, and he had lost all his control of himself. The entire dragon collapsed to the ground. Control Spirit Bullet. Klein had used his Worms of Spirit as the material to contain the control spirit bullets made from the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. It could even freeze sequence 3 saints for 1 or 2 seconds. At that moment, Vin Rambus, who had an incomplete mythical creature form, wasn't much stronger than a sequence 3 saint. Back when Amon's avatar was hit by the control spirit bullet, it had also froze for more than a second. In addition, Klein could also get Kona's Kilgore to magnify the power of the bullet. However, to grab the opportunity, he had failed to do it in time. The string of team combination attacks from before had already made Klein turn poignant, as obtaining the aid of a demigod from the lawyer pathway was terrifying. It was very, very effective. Of course, under normal circumstances, the Earl of the Fallen's Magnify could only amplify the effects and influence that strengthened one's body or actions without helping others. However, the problem was that, as marionettes with worms of spirit within them, they were without a doubt no different from Klein. He hadn't been augmenting others, but himself. Seizing the opportunity of Vin Rambus falling into a state of paralysis, Winner and Nooney obtained initial control over the spirit body threads. The incomplete dragon had just ended its rigid state when its thoughts became sluggish. Its movement had a certain delay. It had to be said that, after a bizarro sorcerer obtained a powerful marionette, they could unleash terrifying powers through their cooperation with their marionettes. Klein also had a cheat-like method like control spirit bullets. This was something that could only be created by him because he was the only one who could stir the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. Of course, Amon and other powerhouses also had similar charms and bullets. The only difference was the effects would be different. Seeing that Vin Rambus had come under a certain level of control, Klein began preparing to disrupt any form of resistance he tried putting up, preventing him from escaping from his current state until he became a marionette. However, at this moment, his head suddenly ached due to an intolerable mania in his heart. Then, he became extremely down, as if he couldn't feel joy anymore. He despised himself and wished he could give up his life just like that so that he wouldn't be a burden on others. In the blink of an eye, he became excited. His eyes seemed to be blood-red and filled with hatred towards anything, wanting to destroy everything he saw. Not good. Before his mental state deteriorated, Klein realized that he had been influenced by Vin Rambus at some point in time. Something was wrong with his body of heart and mind. He hurriedly attempted to cogitate to fight against the abnormal mental state. However, various thoughts that didn't seem to belong to him flashed through his mind. Let's end it here. Fuck, think of a way to save yourself. What exactly happened? I think I have a serious mental illness. A psychiatric disease that's contagious? The special mental illness that Miss Justice mentioned? This is indeed a high sequence beyond a power of the spectator pathway. Why are you saying so much? That's a demigod psychiatrist you're facing. Turning him into a marionette will easily resolve this problem. Realizing that Gehrman Sparrow hadn't shot the second bullet, Vin Rambus's face, covered in grayish-white scales, revealed a faint smile. Although he hadn't anticipated the tight cooperation between Gehrman Sparrow and his two marionettes, causing him to quickly fall into a perilous situation, it wasn't like he hadn't done anything prior to this. Before he left the sea of collective subconscious, he had secretly planted contagious madness in a marionette. A marionette was, after all, a dead person. Although it was unable to be controlled by any other methods other than spirit body threads, it didn't mean that they didn't have an island of consciousness. It was just a dead mass, but it was precisely here that Vin Rambus buried a seed named madness. The seed couldn't affect the marionette itself, but it could secretly infect the sea of collective subconscious of its surroundings, causing the person who kept switching between bodies to unknowingly place themselves in an environment with a contagious mental disease. Also, this madness could also be transmitted via spirit body threads. In addition, this type of infection stemmed from one's self. It wasn't something an angelic blessing could screen. At most, it would be weakened and have the effects weakened. This was a high-sequence spectator's power, manipulator's mental plague. In ancient times, there would be people from time to time who were placed in repressed states for prolonged periods of time and appear abnormal at the same time. Their abnormality influenced the people around them, causing mass hysteria to happen. An ancient folk song once sang of it in such a manner: 7 young ladies are dancing weirdly on the street, 9 men are rolling on the ground laughing by their sides, on a horse carriage passing by, the nobles are slapping their faces, the stone children are crying outside the house by the street, people are hurting each other. The entire city is crazy. If one thought about it carefully, it would make one feel an inexplicable sense of horror. However, Vin Rambus knew that the scene described in the myth was true. It was an experiment from a spectator pathway demigod. A highly contagious mental plague. By the time Gehrman Sparrow's actual body went crazy, his control over his marionettes would undoubtedly be lost. When that happened, Vin Rambus would be able to escape from his predicament. It wouldn't take long, as it only took a few seconds. At that moment, a manipulator like Vin Rambus wasn't afraid that Gehrman Sparrow had the charm which Audrey had used, the one that could temporarily swap fates between two people. This was because a swap would put Gehrman Sparrow in a state of becoming a marionette. His thoughts would turn sluggish and his body would stiffen. As for Vin Rambus, being infected by the mental plague was a relatively simple problem for him to resolve. At this moment, Vin Rambus saw the Gehrman Sparrow on the rooftop aiming his left hand at the Gehrman Sparrow, who was holding the iron-black long-barreled revolver. He gripped his fingers and slowly turned his wrist. Distortion. Klein had used Kona's Kilgore's Beyonder powers to distort the level of his mental disease, weakening it and slowing down the deterioration. Making use of this period in which he had clarity of mind, he raised Death Knell again and pulled the trigger. Bang! Another control spirit bullet shot out and hit the motionless, massive, incomplete dragon. At the same time, Kona's Kilgore used Magnify. Despite being attacked, Vin Rambus didn't escape from Anuni's control, because he had fallen into a long period of feeling numb and stiff. Klein silently kept count of the time, shooting a third control spirit bullet before Vin Rambus truly recovered. And before the third control spirit bullet's magnified effects ended, the grayish-white, incomplete dragon trembled as it returned to normal, no longer looking sluggish. The standard answer of the Twilight Hermit Order. From the looks of it, the psychology alchemist's demigod doesn't know what Adam's true goal is either. Even as official members of the Twilight Hermit Order, most of them probably don't know. Klein didn't have any problems thinking thanks to his situation inside the concealed world. Ariana didn't show any surprise as she pressed, "What is the trend of the times?" Vin Rambus's eyes were unfocused, but his expression was solemn as he answered, "A war, one that will sweep the entire world." "This, isn't peace nice?" Klein frowned slightly as he couldn't help but mumble inwardly. He knew very well what a world war would do to humans. He only wished that his investigation with the Church of Eve would be able to seize the key and successfully prevent the war which the Twilight Hermit Order was strongly pushing from erupting. Ariana fell silent for a second before asking, "What's the secret George III is hiding?" Vin Rambus revealed a smile. Every king is restrained by 3 major contracts and can only reach a limit of sequence 5. But with our help, he bypassed the restrictions and has already reached a higher level. Once the tides of the times come, he'll easily be able to ascend to the spot that should have belonged to him. 3 major contracts. What's that? It's understandable to limit a king to sequence 5 due to the strong push to keep mysticism under wraps. It's best for a king to be changed normally. The people will find it acceptable if they could live for 80 to 90 years old, but to still be active at 120 to 130 years will be the cause for conspiracy theories and panic. George III cooperated with the psychology alchemists and the demonist sect to live longer? Typically, this is a restriction on the king, not the other members of the Augustus family. They should have grounded angels among them, so there's no reason for them to support George III. Many questions arose in his mind. George III still isn't a demigod, is he? Is he using some method to possess a higher level and perform the acting ahead of time? Ariana asked unhurriedly. To the Church of Evernight, this was a crucial problem. If George III was already a demigod, they could directly contact the Church of Storms and Steam to capture him because the king himself was enough evidence. Vin Rambus's soul nodded and said, "Yes." "What is the exact method?" Ariana continued asking. Vin Rambus slowly shook his head and said, "I'm not sure. The person in charge of this matter is our president. I only remember him once mentioning that he wanted George III to have more talent." More talent? Upon hearing such a description, Klein instantly thought of something in Roselle's diary. In the eyes of the emperor, the so-called talent was to make one's psyche and soul more like a high-level ancestor, as such be able to obtain the recognition of the corresponding beyonder characteristics or the mental imprint within sealed artifacts, allowing them to easily consume the potion and wield the sealed artifacts without the immense negative effects. This wasn't a perfect solution. It could even be said that there were great latent risks. This was because the mental imprint would revert and control the consumer or wielder's soul, causing them to experience certain changes. If anyone were to rely on this method to advance to a demigod, there was an extremely high chance of becoming a monster formed of mental sutures. Was George III hypnotized? He actually accepted such a method? No, if he was hypnotized, The Augustus family's angel or sealed artifacts would definitely discover the problem. Klein became even more puzzled as he waited for the ascetic leader floating in the sky to ask further. Ariana clearly knew what more talent meant. Without any change in expression, she asked, "Who is your president?" Vin Rambus revealed a look of reminiscence. "He has many identities and names, but I can confirm that he is the president of our psychology alchemists as long as I see him. His current identities and names are, one of the 4 kings of the sea, the king of the Black Throne Barrows Hopkins, the former chancellor of the Backland Medical School, the royal family's medical consultant, the already dead Polly Derlau, the famous ascetic of the Central Sonia Sea, Eric Drake, king of the Black Throne." It was only then that he realized that he had heard of this title, but he had always neglected it, not taking it to heart and seldom thinking about it. "So this pirate king is from the spectator pathway." He nodded in enlightenment. Ariana listened quietly and asked, "What secret is George III hiding in the Blood Emperor ruins?" Vin Rambis's slightly dazed expression changed slightly. "An extremely important thing. If he wants to grasp it, he will need a large number of sacrificial rituals." "What is it?" Ariana pressed without any pause. Vin Rambis was taken aback. I don't remember." He suddenly raised his hand to grip his soul's head, clearly in pain. However, no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't remember the answer. Was this memory forcefully deleted by Adam or a certain angel from the spectator pathway? Klein watched with a heavy expression as he felt that the secret in the ruins was more important than he imagined. Ariana fell silent for a few seconds before lowering her head and asking Klein, "Do you have anything you want to ask?" Klein thought for a moment and asked Vin Rambis, "What is the name of the high-sequence beyonder potions of the spectator pathway?" The pain in Vin Rambis's soul lessened as he slowly replied, "Sequence 4 Manipulator. Sequence 3 Dreamweaver. Sequence 2 Discerner. Sequence 1 Author." He didn't mention Sequence 0 Visionary, clearly unaware. "What's the potion formula for Manipulator?" Although Klein felt that his question was rather substandard compared to Mam Ariana's, he still asked. In a dazed tone, Vin Rambis said without hesitation, "The main ingredient is an elderly mind dragon's complete brain, or the crystalline heart of a tree mentor, or a beyonder characteristic of a manipulator. The supplementary ingredients are 80 milliliters of the blood of an elderly mind dragon, 3 golden leaves of a tree mentor, and 7 different drops of tears from different humans or non-human creatures that were shed due to intense emotions. The ritual is that on a special occasion with at least 10,000 people, drink the potion when they are in the midst of an emotional resonance." In contrast, the difficulty of a demigod ritual of the spectator pathway isn't that high. That's right. Spectators can heal and analyze themselves, allowing them to effectively deal with the madness and the loss of control brought about by the potion, so the ritual can be simplified. Klein nodded in thought. "What's the potion formula for Dreamweaver?" "I don't know." Vin Rambis shook his head. "All right then." Klein asked Vin Rambis why he had personally come to Audrey and received the corresponding answer. Then he said to Ariana, "I have no further questions." The questions he had couldn't be answered by Vin Rambis. Ariana's right hand pressed softly, causing Vin Rambis's soul to return to his body. Following that, the angel glanced at Klein and said calmly, "Don't use him as a marionette. Before his mental imprint is removed, it's best you don't use his beyonder characteristic to create items." "Of course, I don't want Adam to visit me." Klein nodded sincerely. "I will remember it. Thank you, Ma'am Ariana." Chapter 1054 Tailored-Made Ritual. After thanking her, Klein immediately gave up his control over Vin Rambis, making it impossible for him to maintain his marionette-like state. With that, this spectator pathway demigod collapsed to the ground and became a corpse. Ariana lowered her head and took a look, the darkness in her eyes growing deeper. Vin Rambis's corpse immediately got erased like a pencil drawing, as if it was being wiped away by an eraser, inch by inch, leaving behind only the ice-blue metal cylinder. Right on the heels of that, beams of light seeped out of the void and quickly gathered together, forming a strange object. It was fist-sized and looked like a heart. However, it resembled a different kind of brain, with its surface being covered in grayish-white wrinkles, each crevice with countless symbols and strange patterns that extended into the surroundings. These connected to a world that beyonders of other pathways couldn't see. This was the beyonder characteristic left behind by a manipulator. Miss Ariana's concealment and reversing concealment process is able to quickly extract Vin Rambise's Beyonder characteristic. Klein came to a realization after a moment of pause. At this moment, Ariana calmly said, "The mental imprints in it have all been removed." "Thank you, Ma'am Ariana." Not surprised at all. He bowed as if he had prepared to do so. He had decisively given up on his marionette because he foresaw that something like this would happen. In fact, his original plan was to bring Vin Rambis above the gray fog as a marionette, allowing him to use unshadowed crucifix to purge the manipulator, dreamwalker, hypnotist, and other Beyonder characteristics out. This way, Miss Justice no longer needed to worry about the ingredients needed before becoming a demigod. Even her Beyonder dog at home had a chance of advancing. After all, Audrey had briefly mentioned in the past to Dwayne Dantes that her act of escaping from Vin Rambise's control was all thanks to Susie. But later on, he considered that there was no way he could bring Vin Rambis above the gray fog inside this world of concealment, as it would directly expose the fact that he was the fool under Ariana's watchful eyes. And once he left, no matter where he teleported to, there was a chance of being discovered by Adam because of Vin Rambise's existence. In that case, giving up a marionette in front of Ariana was undoubtedly a better choice. At least, this angel had a high chance of helping him remove the mental imprint on the Beyonder characteristic. And none of these affected Klein's original plan. He could easily find some ingredients to make Vin Rambise's Beyonder characteristic into a problematic potion. He would then pour it onto an ordinary item so that it could absorb the potion and transform. After obtaining such a sealed artifact and binding it with the unshadowed crucifix, he could obtain the corresponding Beyonder characteristics by keeping track of the time. As for the mental corruption during this process, there was no need for concern. The unshadowed crucifix could also cleanse it. Klein picked up Vin Rambise's Beyonder characteristic, but he wasn't able to stuff it into the iron cigar case. He could only stuff it into his pocket. As for Ariana, she cast her gaze towards the ice-blue metal cylinder and said in an unhurried voice, "It's from the cosmos, so it's best you don't use it. Even you carrying it with you should be limited. Otherwise, a gaze might be cast onto you, causing you to be corrupted and suffer aberrations." From the cosmos? Klein found the description familiar. Soon, he remembered the origins of its familiarity. This originated from the yellow light Venethan's prophecy of the apocalypse in sites in the spirit world from the Abraham family. Casting one's gaze from the cosmos, the land shatter. Everything in the world will cease to exist. The apocalypse. The origins of this sealed artifact is related to the apocalypse? What does the cosmos represent? What does it have to do with the astral world? A series of questions formed in his mind, making his expression turn heavy. Faced with his question, Ariana nodded gently and said, "Yes, the cosmos." "Is it the cosmos above our heads?" He pointed at the dark night sky which was embedded with the gigantic crimson moon. "Yes." Ariana gave an affirmative answer, but she didn't explain further. After some thought, he asked again, "There are many hostile existences that are attempting to destroy this world?" Ariana's gaze swept across his face and finally stopped at his eyes. "I can't give you an answer. There are some things that make it easier to be infected the more you know. Both your body and soul will be infected. Once you become an angel, you can seek out the exact answer. The more I know, the easier it is to get infected." A chill ran down Klein's back. He didn't ask Rhodes earlier about the sealed artifacts that Vin Rambis possessed, because he was afraid that Adam would notice them if they left any traces behind. When facing a king of angels, no amount of caution was enough. Seeing that Ariana wasn't revealing anything else, Klein pointed at the ice-blue metal cylinder and asked, "How should we handle this item?" The description of the ascetic leader made him a little afraid of bringing the sealed artifact above the gray fog to disinfect. Ariana calmly said, "My suggestion is to sacrifice it to the goddess. Together with the contributions you have previously rendered, you can exchange them for what you want." Klein nodded slightly. "I understand." After expressing his gratitude, Ariana's figure was quickly erased and disappeared into the dark garden under the abnormally huge moon. And with that, the world of concealment collapsed. Klein observed for a few seconds before taking out candles and other ritual items he carried with him. He quickly set up an altar and sacrificed the ice-blue metal cylinder to the Evernight goddess. At the end of the ritual, amidst the howling winds, the burning ash of the herbs and the surrounding soil rose up and landed onto an empty spot on the altar. The ash and soil were connected, forming words. Sequence 3, Scholar of Yore. Main ingredients: hound of fulgrim, pair of eyes. 1 demonic wolf of fog's transformed heart. Supplementary ingredients: 100 milliliters of hound of fulgrim blood, 30 grams of white frost crystal of demonic wolf of fog, a large amount of real ancient historical records. Advancement ritual. Be separated from reality for at least 300 years and consume the potion after one becomes history and doesn't belong to the present era. This. Klein couldn't help but blink, wondering if he had seen the wrong description. The description of not belonging to the present era made him think of a line in his honorific name. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. I've been hanging above the extraordinary door of light for more than 300 years. In a sense, have I already completed the ritual and am only waiting to consume the potion? The mysterious space above the gray fog really has a very close relationship with the seer pathway. Could it be the manifestation of the uniqueness? Klein was momentarily delighted but also grim. This was because he didn't know if a price was exacted for such a bestowment. Phew, I really want to jump to a neighboring pathway after becoming an angel to not follow whatever path was planned for me. For other bizarro sorcerers, the hardest part about the advancement ritual is to live for more than 300 years. After all, this isn't a pathway that's known for having a long lifespan. Also, being separated from reality for 300 years easily drives one mad. For bizarro sorcerers who are in a dissociative state, the risk of madness and losing control is quite significant. Klein looked at the Scholar of Yore's potion formula as thoughts couldn't help but flash through his mind. After an unknown amount of time, he ended the ritual and put away the corresponding items. As he walked out of the garden, the gigantic crimson moon and the pitch-black darkness faded away, disappearing inch by inch. Then, he saw fresh autumn flowers and the sunlight shining above them. He also saw a blonde girl wading in between the house and the garden. Audrey's eyes wore an elated look as the corners of her lips curled up unconsciously. Klein nodded at her before his figure was enveloped by scarlet flames. Elsewhere in the garden, there was another flame soaring in the air, but it wasn't obvious. When the flames dissipated, Gehrman's sparrow was gone. The remnants of the crimson moon and the night scenery vanished completely. Audrey fell into a daze for a few seconds before thoughtfully looking away and entering Viscount Glaint's residence. After she left in a carriage with Susie and the servants, she returned home and had a chance to be alone. As expected, she received the world's invitation for a meeting. Above the gray fog, inside the palace, Audrey looked at the world Gehrman's sparrow and calmly asked, what was Vin Rambise's true goal? She had long known from Gehrman's sparrow's calm composure that Vin Rambis had been finished off. Klein answered frankly, the first is to find out if there's a mastermind behind Zio and Furza's actions. Secondly, when the princes expressed their goodwill towards Earl Hall's family, the cue was for you to not be an obstacle. In essence, it's to create a fracture between the three major churches. With regards to this matter, Audrey had already discussed it with Mr. World before. There was no need to seek further explanations as she asked, then why was a demigod like Vin Rambis personally visiting me? Klein smiled and said, if you wish to deceive the guards arranged by Earl Hall, as well as hypnotize a hypnotist with great certainty without causing any commotion, a sequence 5 might not be capable of doing so. Therefore, it's best to send a demigod. Furthermore, you knew Vin Rambis and had interactions with him before, so your vigilance against him would be minimized. To be honest, if you weren't careful enough and had an unnoticeable helper like Susie, the whole matter would have gone on smoothly without you and I knowing until Monday. Justice Audrey didn't wear a thick mask. She smiled and sighed with mixed emotions. So I'm already this powerful. Powerful to the point of needing a demigod to be certain of success. He was even more powerful than I had imagined. You actually hypnotized a demigod that's good at hypnotism, Klein praised with a smile. Audrey pursed her lips without realizing it and smiled. That's mainly because of the fate siphon charm you gave me. My hypnotist potion seems to have completely digested as a result of this. Chapter 1055 Train of Though Completely Digested? That's understandable. This is the act of hypnotizing a demigod. Although it's thanks to the fate siphon charm, it only helped to open the door of the body of heart and mind. The subsequent consciousness manipulation and the cue planting needs to be done personally. If she weren't careful, she would trigger an intense rejection and would lead to failure. Acting done to the extreme would definitely accelerate the digestion process. Klein nodded gently and said in praise, "This is a good thing. It's even more so for the current situation." Audrey understood what Mr. World meant. In this storm that was sweeping around thanks to the angel of imagination Adam and King George III, even if she stood by the sidelines, she could sense her weakness and how powerless she was. She couldn't wait to improve herself. She tersely acknowledged and said, "I'll urge the son to give his conditions to complete the deal and try my best to advance to sequence 5. When the time comes, I hope that I can receive the protection of Mr. Fool and remain conscious in my dream." Having been prepared for this, Klein smiled and said, "Actually, you don't have to wait that long. I'll be able to sell you a Dreamwalker's Beyonder characteristic by tomorrow, and at the latest, Friday." As it was a private exchange, Klein didn't act as the world by deliberately making his voice hoarse. All he did was sound reserved. "Really?" Audrey's eyes widened, not concealing her surprise. Klein nodded and said, "It's actually from Vin Rambus. The new cross that Mr. Fool obtained can allow the Beyonder characteristics to be purged." He spoke very simply without explaining the actual steps. He maintained Gehrman Sparrow's unique coldness. "Is that so?" The corners of Audrey's lips curled up as she broke into a smile. She pressed against her chest and said, "Praise Mr. Fool dash. And thank you, Mr. World." A double token of gratitude. Klein chuckled inwardly and calmly said, "It's just a transaction. You need to pay for it." He lampooned to himself. Audrey maintained her smile and asked, "What do you need?" "For a sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic, £8,000. Klein chose something that Miss Justice could gather in the fastest time possible. Audrey didn't mind the price. She thought for a while before asking, "Can you sell the separated hypnotist characteristic to me as well?" When she said that, she smiled in embarrassment and said, "It's for Susie." The incident this time was resolved all thanks to her. Yes, the higher her level, the greater the help she can provide will be. "Well, I'll also help her." "No problem. £4,000. Having expected this, Klein directly named his price. In his plan, he could stop once the hypnotist was purged, doing so without continuing the separation process. Now, he would place the unshadowed crucifix together for a long period of time, allowing its remaining characteristics to take form. A total of £12,000? Audrey asked for confirmation, not feeling too much pressure. As she didn't have any major expenditures for the past few months, she only had £10,000 left. Just a little bit of economizing was enough to satisfy her needs. Seeing the world nod, she heaved a sigh of relief. "I'll pay it before Friday." After closing the deal, her mood became better with Vin Rambus having been killed. She asked as though she was chatting, "I'll also buy the complete brain of an adult mind dragon from the sun as well. However, I won't be in such a rush. Susie won't be able to digest the hypnotist potion so quickly." At this point, she glanced shyly at Mr. World. "What needs to be exchanged for Vin Rambus's demigod characteristic?" Klein laughed and replied, "I still don't know what I'm lacking. In fact, other than the manipulator characteristic from Vin Rambus, I also have the corresponding potion formula. While you digest the Dreamwalker potion, I'll slowly think about what I need, and I'll get you to do certain things and gather some materials so that you can make sufficient contributions to exchange for them." Upon hearing these words, Audrey's green eyes lit up. "All right." After her reply, she asked with interest, "Is this the same as how Zio contributes to MI9? "Yes, it's also the same method that the various major churches use." Klein gave an affirmative answer. Audrey nodded and curiously asked, "Mr. World, do you know the name of the high-sequence Beyonder potions of the spectator pathway?" Klein answered simply, "Manipulator, Dreamweaver, Discerner, Author, and Sequence 0 Visionary. Hearing the names makes me look forward to them. Especially Author and Visionary." Audrey fantasized for a few seconds before diverting the topic back on track. Did Vin Rambus say what the king's secret is? Also, why are they helping the king? She was partially asking for Zio, but on the other hand, she was also concerned herself. The king's secret? He wishes to bypass the 3 major contracts the royal family signed with the Orthodox churches and become a demigod. For this, he needs to use many sacrificial rituals to gain control of some important object inside the Blood Emperor's ruins. Heh. That was Vin Rambus's answer. But it might not be the entire truth and might very likely be only a part of it. As Klein answered, he shared his line of thought. As for the psychology alchemists or the Twilight Hermit Order, they need a war that sweeps the entire world. This is what they're pushing for and hope to see as the trend of the times. A war that sweeps the entire world, Audrey repeated softly. Her pretty eyebrows furrowed slightly, and her cheerful mood plummeted again. Although her status and standing hadn't made her truly experience the cruelty of war before, she was no longer sheltered and cut off from the world. She could already imagine it to a certain degree. After a brief moment of silence, Audrey took a deep breath and forced a smile. I hope we can stop this. After exchanging a few more words, she left the gray fog and returned to the real world. As for Klein, he busily used clear water, tree sap, herbal powder, thousand-faced hunter's blood, spirit world plunder powder, and other materials to dilute Vin Rambise's Beyonder characteristic and concoct a potion that had a questionable name which was definitely filled with problems. Then, he found an ordinary glass bottle and put the potion inside. He wanted to know what kind of sealed artifact it would eventually transform into. This took quite a bit of time, so he used the power of the mysterious space above the gray fog to construct a spherical barrier around the glass bottle to prevent any influence it had on the entire area after it mutated. After doing all of this, he returned to 160 Buckland Street. He prepared to summon a Rhodes and ask it for information about the two Beyonder creatures known as Hound of Fulgrim and Demonic Wolf of Fog. At that moment, with the passage of time, the clouds in the sky had thickened, and the sun was covered up once again. The entirety of Backland had become as dark and cold as the morning. Standing in front of the desk, he looked out the window at the sky. For some reason, he felt as though he and the Church of Evernight had neglected an important problem. Their investigations had been going relatively smoothly during this period of time, and the intelligence they received was also delving deeper. However, for some reason, it made him feel uneasy. Is there some influence or misdirection in this matter, and truly is something that I can't think of? Even heading above the gray fog is useless. Divination will most likely point towards him. Klein hurriedly collected his thoughts, unfurled the paper, and drew a picture consisting of symbols that implied concealment and mystery prying with a fountain pen. 1 second. 2 seconds. After nearly 8 seconds, the full-body mirror in the room turned dark. Aqueous light rippled and formed silver words. Exalted Great Master, your puny, loyal, and humble servant, Rhodes, is here to answer your summoning. I think I'm late. I'm already a Grade 1 sealed artifact. I need some time if I want to circumvent the isolation. Please forgive me, Great Master. You're a Grade 1 sealed artifact? Klein asked with a surprised look. He could already imagine what was going on within the Church of Steam. The mirror that likes to play question and answer games has suddenly gone crazy. The full-body mirror's silver words squirmed and formed new words. Great Master, is this a question? He wanted to answer no, but to maintain his image he nodded and said, yes. Rhodes immediately produced a line of words. I'm not actually a true Grade 1 sealed artifact yet. I'm just enjoying the treatment of a Grade 1 sealed artifact in advance. This is mainly because a Grade 1 sealed artifact needs to be reported to other churches and be given a new number. The Church of Steam doesn't wish to do so. So that's how it is. That's understandable. Klein nodded gently. Got it. The aqueous light on the full-body mirror's surface flashed again as new silver words formed. Supreme Master, do you have any questions to test your loyal servant, Rhodes? What do you know about Hounds of Fulgrim and Demonic Wolves of Fog? He asked without standing on ceremony, completely unfazed that it was actually 2 questions. In the mirror, the silver words squirmed like they had a life of their own and changed shapes. The Hounds of Fulgrim are a type of unique creature of the spirit world. They live in the historical void. Even the Seven Lights only know of them and are unable to interact with them unless they leave the historical void and attempt to hunt. But even so, what you see might only be a projection of their past. The Demonic Wolves of Fog are a type of high-level demonic wolves. After the death of the ancient gods in the Cataclysm, and with them being killed by the Antigonus family, Zeratul family, and the Church of Evernight, they're extremely rare now. Furthermore, they're all good at anti-divination and deceit. They aren't easy to find. In other words, the Church of Evernight likely has materials and items related to the Demonic Wolf of Fog? And with this, I can bring it to the spirit world and use the law of Beyonder characteristic convergence to bait a Hound of Fulgrim? Klein began his train of thought as he read on. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.